Athens are returning to classes today following the shocking killing of an Augusta University nursing student whose body was found Thursday on a popular running trail near the campus. While some students are ready to get back to studying, the murder of Laken Hope Riley has reiterated the need to stay safe on campus.
I think we definitely need to be more aware, like walking together.
ICE officials say 26-year-old Jose Antonio Ibarra, who entered the country illegally, was arrested for the murder and faces a number of charges, including murder. President Joe Biden and Republican frontrunner Donald Trump will each visit the U.S.-Mexico border in Texas on Thursday. Biden is set to visit Brownsville. Trump's campaign is still working out the exact location of his visits. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, Alex, John.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael Barr. So here is the story that, let's be honest, in the next few minutes is going to go #1 on Read Go.
Absolutely.
Story spike for sure. The Hampton Jitney is warning of rising costs from New York City congestion pricing. So this is a private bus company. It's in 50th year, and it shuttles people from the city to the Hamptons and Long Island's Norfolk at affordable rates, and literally, like, the line is off the charts right here. Yep. Near our office during the summer, and it's going to increase their pricing because, well, they're going to have to because of congestion charges.
Yep, under congestion pricing, buses would pay a $24 fee during peak periods, although they would receive a $6 tunnel credit during that time of entering or exiting the central business district through the Queens Midtown Tunnel. Jitney vehicles entered the tunnel about 20,000 times in 2023, and during the summer, it's packed. And I shame the people that it's right across the street. There's a pickup spot right across the street from Bloomberg, and packed on a Friday afternoon.
Oh my gosh.
Thursday afternoon, pretty crowded. Even on Wednesday, there'll be people there with their little and I shame them. I'm like, you're leaving already? This is your long weekend?
Yeah, and they absolutely do not care when you do that. No. So it's $40 for a one-way prepaid ticket from New York to the Hamptons versus, say, you know, your helicopter ride, which you can definitely see over summer, all those helicopter rides picking up, which is $1,000 for a one-way seat, and the LIRR charges $31.75. But then you got to get to the LIRR, which is a whole other thing.
But I don't know. That seems like the way to go. But again, the Jitney is super popular here for people that are trying to get out east. And this is going to be a real deal. We hear from John Tucker, our congestion reporter, talking about it all the time. And so the question is, do they get an exemption? And apparently the MTA is kind of being very, tight with the exemptions being given out.
I mean, yeah, because it's just a slippery slope. Like one star, it's just going to keep coming.
I think John Tucker deserves an exemption, unquestionably.
Well,
he gets in at 2 in the morning.
And now that he's studying for his medical degree, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Anyway, Balance of Power is coming up next with Joe Matthew and Kelly Lyons.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Washington, D.C.
Less than a week until the start of a government shutdown. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as we count down to midnight Friday without a plan in place. And as Donald Trump tries to shut down the Republican primary following another blowout here, another blowout win in South Carolina, officially sweeping the early states. We're going to get the latest for you today from Bloomberg campaign reporter Mark Niquette. And from Bloomberg Government's Jack Fitzpatrick with an eye on Capitol Hill. Analysis today from Jim Ellis, the founder of Ellis Insight, as we read the tea leaves from over the weekend and dare look down ballot. Our signature panel is back together. Rick Davis and G.D. Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors, are with us for the duration. And we start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. Let's get to Monday trading right now in New York with Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Very much, Joe Matthew. Indeed, back to work Monday. We have got the Dow higher, the S&P is lower, and the NASDAQ Composite Index up now by 20. Do want to begin with a developing story headline right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service. The Federal Trade Commission is suing to block Kroger's $24.6 billion Albertsons acquisition. Shares of Albertsons, they're down 0.6%. Kroger shares lower now by 1.1%. Stocks, bonds, and the dollar all seeing small moves as traders brace for a barrage of economic data and remarks from Fed speakers this week that will help shape the outlook for interest rates. The S&P lower by 5 right now, down 0.1%. The Dow up 8, up less than 0.1%, while NASDAQ is up 18, a gain of 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.29% with a 2-year 4.71%. Spot gold down $8 the ounce to 2,027, drop there of 0.4%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1%, 77.28 for a barrel of WTI. Well, as I mentioned, lots of economic data this week, along with remarks from Fed speakers. But a broader question is the Federal Reserve and its rate-cutting timing in an election year. Subhadra Rajappa is head of U.S. rate strategy at Societe Generale, and she was asked that very question this morning by our Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Intelligence.
So Powell has told us that they're not, partisan in any way. They're not focused on the political scenario, and they tend to do what's right for the economy, and I do believe them in that. But that said, there is no precedence for the Fed cutting rates or adjusting policy just before an election.
Right. And right now we've got Berkshire Hathaway shares down 1.4%. The market value of Warren Buffett's conglomerate is close to $1 trillion. Recapping the Dow just turning negative, now down by 0.5 point. S&P 500 index down 5, down 0.1%. Balance of Power continues now. Once again, your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, we thank you. Welcome to the Monday edition. Back to work, as Charlie said, here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. Find us on YouTube right now. Search Bloomberg Global News. You'll see our live stream coming out of Washington and New York as we try to bring you the most important stories of the day here. And in Washington, it has a lot to do with the government shutdown looming less than a week off. This is Friday now we're talking about. There was a hope that over the weekend a plan would emerge. Sunday night, we were told. It did not happen. If you're following along on our home game, the government begins shutting down Friday and would be totally shut the following Friday, March 1 and March 8. We're going to talk to Jack Fitzpatrick about this a little bit later on this hour as the Dear Colleague letters start flying again. As we also pick up the pieces coming out of South Carolina, this is what we're going to focus on for the next little bit here, and a 20-point blowout for Donald Trump, who has now swept all of the early states. This has never happened before. I know you thought it was going to happen because everyone predicted it, but let's just stop down for a moment. Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, and yes, the Virgin Islands. All for Donald Trump. Unprecedented in a contested primary. We have never seen this before. And so now Nikki Haley is hearing what she has been fearing, that the money might be going away. The headline on the terminal: billionaire GOP donors pivot to Congress as Haley run fades. We're talking about the Koch brothers here. Americans for Prosperity Action had spent tens of millions trying to create a real challenge to Donald Trump here by way of Nikki Haley. And as we are reporting now, the political network created by the billionaire industrialist announcing that it's suspending its support for Nikki Haley, and it's going down ballot, House and Senate races. That's where we start our conversation with Mark Niquette, reporting for Bloomberg, national politics and government reporter. He's the man on the trail, and it's great to see you. Mark, after another primary weekend, we'll remind everybody that a week from tomorrow is Super Tuesday. Nikki Haley says she's in for the duration, at least through next week. Mark, is that what you expect?
Well, that's what she's telling us. I mean, presidential candidates only get out of races when the money dries up and they can't keep the lights on, not when they're necessarily losing. So she's pledged to stay in the race until Super Tuesday, give these states, these 21 states that are voting here in the next 10 days a chance to vote. And we'll see. I guess she'll probably have enough money to stay in through that point. But as you said, if the donors keep leaving her now, deciding that she can't ultimately win, or they don't want to keep funding her campaign, she won't just have the money to continue after that.
How important is the Koch money going away here? I feel funny asking you that, Mark, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think every little bit is important. I mean, this was a source of funding for her campaign that, again, was sustaining her, even though she wasn't winning any elections. So not having that access to that money, I think, one, it will be less money that she has available, but it could also signal to other donors that, hey, this is not a good investment anymore. Maybe I should pull my money as well.
Nikki Haley's got events scheduled in the coming days. You'll probably be at some of them if I know you, Mark Niquette. Michigan, Minnesota, Colorado, and Utah. What is she actually trying to accomplish on Super Tuesday, having not won a state yet?
Yeah, I think she's trying to hold out to be the alternative in case Trump, for whatever reason, is not able to continue, or if at some point down in the process here, he's not able to be the nominee. I think it's pretty clear at this point she's not going to win enough delegates to be the nominee. But I think the strategy is to win enough delegates to be relevant and be sort of the alternative in case Trump, for whatever reason, can't continue as a nominee.
Is there a state, or are there a couple of states she's targeting, though, for actual W's on Super Tuesday to say, hey, I can actually do this? You can't come in second place forever, Mark. And I realize that she's got some delegates. She could drive them all the way to the convention if she wants.
Right. Yeah. I think there are some states, I don't know specifically, what she's targeting, but, states in the Western U.S., for example, and states that have, more liberal rules in terms of who can participate in the primary, where she might do better. For example, she was able to do better in New Hampshire than South Carolina because Democrats were able to participate in the Republican primary. So I think the thinking is that she could attract, some Democrats or independents to play in the Republican primary in some of these Super Tuesday states that can help elevate her. But again, she's not shown the ability to actually win these states. I don't think she's gotten higher than 43% in any of these primaries.
Yeah, it's really something. Mark, I appreciate your joining us. Stay in touch as we get into Super Tuesday. We've got more to ask Mark Niquette. Find him on the terminal and at Bloomberg.com. He's an important part of our campaign coverage now as we add the voice of Jim Ellis. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Ellis Insight, the founder of the election analysis service. Jim, it's good to see you. Welcome to Bloomberg Radio and on YouTube as well. We've got a lot of folks here watching and listening, wondering what happens next. I want to go down ballot with you, but before we do that, your insights following Super Tuesday, or South Carolina rather, and heading for Super Tuesday. Is this actually Nikki Haley's last stand next week?
Well, thanks so much for having me. You think it would be. She loses basically 60-40 in her home state. Remember, before, a Republican electorate that had propelled her to being governor twice. I was amused a little bit that your earlier reporter indicated that Donald Trump was the incumbent. I don't think that's the case in South Carolina. So
how about that?
Some people are claiming that Trump didn't do as well in the suburbs as he should have around Charleston and Columbia. But still, 60-40 in the other person's home state, that's a pretty good indication that this race is over. So we'll see. We have Michigan tomorrow, and that's another indication for both Donald Trump and President Biden as to where we might be headed. And we should have official nominees here very early in March. If not by Super Tuesday, then certainly by March 19th, when Ohio and Illinois and Arizona vote.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jim. We're all looking at Joe Biden more closely than the Republican contest in Michigan tomorrow, maybe because there just isn't that much to watch when it comes to Joe Biden. And this is a very special circumstance that could present a problem for him nationally when it comes to Arab American and Muslim American voters. But as far as the Republican primary is concerned, and like I said, I want to move down ballot with you, but when you listened to Nikki Haley last night, does she have a point? In Iowa and New Hampshire, Trump won with about half the vote. We saw what he won with in South Carolina. If you can't win your whole party, how do you win the general?
Well, but that's pretty common. This is a contested race, after all. Remember how many candidates began running here. It's not as if you're unopposed for re-election, really, as President Biden is, or as most presidents have been in the past. So this is an open election, and the fact that he's doing as well as he has, I think, is an indication that he's in very strong shape headed into a general election with the United Republican Party. I mean, no one really has had as strong as internal numbers over the course of his term in office and post as Donald Trump has. So I think he's in good shape.
Ellis Insight right now on Bloomberg as we look to Super Tuesday, not presidential, but let's look at some of these Senate races. Jim, starting with California, this is a big one. A lot of money spent, a lot of media, and a lot of attention here. Adam Schiff is looking like he's in a good place going into it. He's certainly spent some money. But it's a jungle primary. As you can explain to our audience here, this has almost as much to do with second place as it does first, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly does. So a jungle primary means everybody's on the same ballot, and 3 states use this for their primary elections. California, of course, being one. It began in Louisiana, but they're going to change and go back to a partisan primary. And Washington is the other state that uses it. So everybody's on the same ballot, and regardless of political party or percentage attained, the first 2 finishers here in California will advance to the November general election. Adam Schiff appears to be set in position 1, but there's a real dogfight in position 2, and it's one of the more unique campaigns we've ever seen in American history, because you have both Adam Schiff and Katie Porter, Congresswoman Porter from Irvine in Orange County. They're the 2 leading Democrats, and they're actually advertising to help Steve Garvey or detract from Steve Garvey coming in second place. Remember, Steve Garvey, the former famous baseball player running for the Republicans. And they are, by claiming he's too conservative, and this obviously is a signal to conservative Republicans to vote for him. So Schiff wants Garvey in second place, and therefore he doesn't have to deal with a double Democratic general election, which would be highly competitive and highly expensive. He wants a Republican next to him in the general. And Katie Porter is advertising to try to knock Garvey out of second place by claiming he won't support Donald Trump, so you have to go for this Eric Early. And so to help propel her into second place. It's really a fascinating situation in California that'll be decided on March the 5th.
This is incredible maneuvering here. Before we move to another state, Jim, is it more likely that we will have a Democrat and a Republican then if they're both spending in that direction?
Polling looks like Garvey is on the move. If the polls are correct, but they're all very close, so it could go any way, and it all depends on turnout. But I think there's a good chance right now that Garvey does get second place, and that would virtually elect Adam Schiff in November.
Fascinating. And that's going to be part of what we're talking about on Super Tuesday. It's not just presidential. Shortly thereafter, Jim, we move to Ohio. That's the 19th of March. Of course, Sherrod Brown, who hasn't had to get on the campaign trail in a while. We're looking at a 3-way Republican race. What do we need to know?
Well, that's an extremely important race for the Republicans, and this is a critical election cycle for the Republicans in the U.S. Senate. They have to take advantage of a favorable map, and by that I mean of the 34 Senate races, the Democrats have to protect or defend 23. The Republicans only 11, and they really don't have very many vulnerable seats. The Democrats think they've got a shot at Ted Cruz in Texas. I don't think that'll be the case at the end of the day. It's really not the year to a presidential year is not the year for a Democrat to win in Texas. So it really comes down to Republicans not only getting to 50 or to 51 to get a bare majority. They need to pretty much run the table and get to 52, 53, 54 to protect themselves against more unfavorable maps coming in 2026 and 2028. As we all know, senators have 6-year terms, and every 2 years, a third of the Senate is up. So this year, it really helps the Republicans, and they have to take advantage of this map. Ohio becomes one of the key states for them. The West Virginia race, without Senator Manchin in that race, looks like it's in the bag. So we're really at effectively 50-50 right now from an electoral standpoint. Ohio, Montana being the next 2 that have to go for the Republicans for them to take advantage of this. In that Republican primary in Ohio, you have a three-way race. The Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, State Senator Matt Dolan, whose family owns part of the Cleveland Guardians baseball team, and the third candidate, who both former President Trump and Senator J.D. Vance has endorsed, the businessman, my name's, I'm escaping on his first name, Marino, that will have a 3-way race to win that
Bernie
nomination.
Marino.
Bernie, thank you so much. And he is, all 3 of them, the polls are very close in that race. It's a 3-way race, and it's I think, frankly, though, whichever one of the three wins, the Republicans are actually going to be in pretty good shape. I think each of those candidates would be strong enough to go up against Sherrod Brown. And really, from Senator Brown's standpoint, he's won tough elections in Ohio before, but the state has really moved to the right since his last election in 2018. And we have to remember these Senate terms are so long that the last time people like Senator Brown and Senator John Tester in Montana were on the ballot was 2018. That was a good Democratic year, a wave, most people thought, for the Democrats. And so they were able to win in those years. And then the previous time, they had 2012. What was happening in 2012? They had Barack Obama on the ballot running for Brown and Senator Tester in those two critical states.
Fascinating. This is why we wanted to talk to Jim Ellis in a real seminar as we look down ballot here, specifically to the Senate. You had the wild card of Maryland and Larry Hogan, and we've got a real conversation. Jim, I hope that you'll come talk to us on the regular here throughout the balance of this cycle. I'm really happy to have you on today and bring your expertise to our viewers and listeners. He's the founder of Ellis Insight Election Analysis Service. Jim Ellis, thank you, sir, for being part of the conversation today. Keep this all in mind as we go into Super Tuesday. It's not just Donald Trump and Nikki Haley we're talking about here, with massive implications when it comes to, yes, the balance of power on Capitol Hill. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Jack Fitzpatrick's going to come in next because that balance of power is not generating a budget. We could start shutting down Friday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The stock market rally has stalled at the start of a data-packed week. Right now, we have got the S&P 500 index just about flat on the day. It is down less than 0.1%, down 3 points right now at 5,085. The Dow is advancing, could see a record close, another record today with the Dow higher by 12 points right now. That is a gain of less than 0.1%. Key takeaway, little change there. We've got NASDAQ up 0.2%, higher by 26 points, now at 16,023. 10-year yield 4.29% with a 2-year right now 4.72%. Spot gold down $8 the ounce to 2,027, down 0.4%, while West Texas Intermediate crude 77.58 a barrel, up now by about 1.4%. The FAA has released a report on the safety culture at Boeing and says an expert panel found there was a disconnect between Boeing's senior management and other members of the organization on safety culture. Boeing shares down now by 0.3%. Federal Trade Commission, 8 states and Washington, D.C. are suing to block Kroger's $24.6 billion acquisition of Albertsons, arguing the tie-up would lead to lower wages for workers and higher prices for groceries. Albertsons up 0.3% right now. Kroger down by 1.1%. Again, recapping, stocks are trading little changed. S&P down 3, drop there of less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That Joe Matthew is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Right, Charlie, thank you. The dear colleague letters are starting to fly, which is never a good sign. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power as we keep our eyes on Midnight Friday. This is when the government's set to start shutting down here. And, well, we've been talking about it for weeks on this program. While many folks had their attention on other matters, it's still here, and there's no deal. Lawmakers will get back Wednesday, at least the House, so they'll have 3 days to put this together, and that would be a land speed record. Chuck Schumer out with the dear colleague last night, accusing Republicans of playing politics with people's lives, and boy, it seems like we've seen this movie before. Jack Fitzpatrick, seen it a lot of times. He's with us from Bloomberg Government and keeping an eye on things here on the Hill. Jack, I'm sure you're in for a couple of weeks. It's Friday followed by Friday, right? Two different deadlines. There was talk of a deal emerging last night that we might wake up Monday morning to having some kind of a deal on spending. It did not happen. Was that real? Was that media talk?
It never seemed
important?
particularly realistic. It was floated out there. It was reported in a couple places. We had heard that some people involved in the negotiations hoped to have something by Sunday night. But even late last week, when it started coming out, 2 staffers from the Speaker's office said, no, that's not a plan. That's not something that's going to happen. So there's a bit of a back and forth on expectations setting. You then saw the dear colleague letter from Chuck Schumer come out late yesterday saying, we hope to have a deal Sunday, but House Republicans are dragging this out. The Speaker then said it's Democrats who are introducing new issues that weren't even in their own bills initially. There's some mudslinging going on. I think when you hear of expectations of, oh, here's when it's going to come together, here's what we know is going to happen, you have to take it with a grain of salt. They are very likely going to take this up to the last minute if they do succeed in avoiding a shutdown. And there are maybe some games being played behind the scenes on expectation setting.
So let's talk options here, and we can remind everyone that this is not the full government. This is 4 departments or 4 spending bills that would be expiring on Friday. And these are the easy ones, right? If you can't figure that out, the week later is going to be really something. The Speaker of the House has vowed to not do another continuing resolution, a short-term deal, although apparently there is talk of doing that. When will we know he's out of options, that we either do a CR or close it down?
That's another last-minute issue because we've heard from the Speaker, we've heard from others in House Republican leadership. It came out from Tom Emmer a little while back. They're not doing another continuing resolution. But if they don't have a deal that they can enact and they're not doing a CR, then it's a question of how long do you shut the government down? And that's what really builds pressure, and people crack under pressure sometimes. So, look, it is very notable that House Republicans have said, absolutely not, we do not want another CR. But that's the escape hatch if nothing else works anyway. So it's going to be a last-minute question of, do they need to buy a little more time? And it's worth keeping in mind that House Republicans in particular do not want to vote for a stopgap measure, and that is a factor that could lead us into a partial shutdown.
They do hate that. A lot of this, we're told, is coming down to policy writers. Is that still the case? Could that change when they come back Wednesday?
That seems to be the case, and it's been pretty consistent that once they got the basic parameters of how much they're going to spend on defense, on non-defense, on each bill, it was a matter of policy writers. There were a ton of policy writers in the House Republican measures. As I said, the Speaker then accused Democrats of adding things that they hadn't included in their own bills. But generally what I've heard is a lot of things were not able to be negotiated by the people who are supposed to write the bills, the subcommittee chairs. And that was sent up to the full committee chairs and to leadership to hash out a great number of remaining policy rider issues that cover a lot of ground.
So this is the granular stuff. Big picture is a meeting tomorrow, apparently at the White House. Joe Biden's invited Mike Johnson to come back with the other leaders. McConnell, Schumer, Jeffries will be there. What's the point if we've come this far without a breakthrough?
We're at a point now where pressure is a major part of the negotiations in the news cycle. That may be more of a factor on Ukraine funding than funding the government. But like I mentioned, when you have a number of things that cannot be negotiated by the people who usually write these bills and it's kicked up to the top, you could call it a staring contest, a game of chicken. The pressure is building on the toughest issues, and this meeting may not be glad-handing, but they'll get a sense of where they agree, where they disagree, who has an advantage and who has a disadvantage.
Then they come out to the sticks, as they say in the business. There'll be a stake out in the driveway. Those microphones will be set up. Does Mike Johnson walk out and badmouth Joe Biden, or say that we actually see eye to eye on some things?
It would be harder for him to say he sees eye to eye with Joe Biden right
harder
now.
Politically, you mean?
He's got to sell a lot to conservatives who do not want to deal with Joe Biden. He's in a tough spot. He's got a lot of members of his conference who do not want to vote for a stopgap. They don't want to vote for anything that could get past the Senate and get Biden's signature. So a kumbaya moment is not in the cards politically for the speaker.
Well, that's going to be a riot. We'll be talking about it tomorrow. That is confirmed, right? Did they all accept the invite? They're going?
They're all invited. Okay. It would be unusual if anybody skipped
But
that.
Johnson's going is the point.
Yes,
Everyone else is just there to bear witness.
Biden
Am I right?
Johnson
That's
are
the point.
two keys.
Yes. Now, I don't know if they're going to talk about anything else, like, say, Ukraine. Maybe this is a very specific topic meeting here, but this is the other matter. As President Zelensky, who's been on quite a tour, speaking of pressure lately, tells us that 31,000 Ukrainians have died in this war, Ukrainian members of the military. And we're seeing this kind of last-minute, full-court press from NATO members, including Poland was on the air with us, their foreign minister, making the point here last week. It was in Washington, D.C. There's no sign of anything changing here, is there?
Not yet, but that's where the pressure comes in, because there have been little bits of movement. It's been pretty quiet in the last week or so, but when you saw the centrist House members led by Brian Fitzpatrick say, well, we have a pared down proposal. Look, it doesn't look like they're about to attach something on Ukraine to one of these government funding bills. It's not moving that quickly, but the pressure is building. You see swing district members feel like they have to put something out there. It's a pressure campaign. I wouldn't say it's an absolute stasis. There has not been a lot of movement, not a lot of negotiating, but as the pressure builds, that's when you look for cracks and slight changes in people's
I'm glad you mentioned that. This brings us to the idea of a discharge petition that would be very rare, and we're told stop talking about it because that never happens. But it seems like it might this time. To see Fitzpatrick, no relation to you, on Sunday morning television, sitting there with a Republican talking about this happening. By the way, the flannel, I guess it's Maine. It makes you wonder if we're getting closer to something here. Does Mike Johnson secretly hope that they do this and he doesn't have his fingerprints on it?
That is one way in which a discharge petition is sometimes useful. That's probably the most obvious way for a discharge petition to work, is if leadership isn't necessarily entirely opposed to putting a bill forward, but they have to go to the opponents and say, look, I had no choice.
Yes.
There are other ways. I think maybe even more important is if there are promises by Democrats to back him up, if there's a motion to vacate the chair and not allow his speakership to be kicked out because of this. That would relieve a lot of pressure on him and move him toward potentially favoring Ukraine. So those are two big questions there with regard to the pressure on Mike Johnson specifically.
Then the Senate would have to, I guess, handle or deal with whatever they sent back over there. And I bring that up because I'm just compelled by the headline that John Thune has decided to endorse Donald Trump. This is about as close to Mitch McConnell as you can get here in the chain of command. And I wonder how important that is when we've seen the hand of Donald Trump impact what's happening in the House to this extent.
Yeah, it is a sign of the strength of Donald Trump in Republican politics that if you were harshly critical of him following January 6th, now you see those same people coming back to endorse Donald Trump. He's had a huge effect on these Ukraine negotiations. He hasn't necessarily scuttled the possibility of sending further aid to Ukraine, but he looms large over these talks and over anything else on Capitol Hill. The question of Republicans looking to Trump saying, what exactly does he want to do? Is he going to come after me for this vote? That is one of the key questions in the Capitol.
Sure. Now, Donald Trump's going to the border this week. Apparently, Joe Biden is too. He's not going to let anything get through on the border while Joe Biden's running for re-election, is he?
I mean, that's, again, where you look to the centrists, you look to something pared down. He is largely responsible for the death of that bipartisan negotiated measure led by James Lankford, who kind of got thrown under the bus. Could there be something smaller, focused on a Remain in Mexico policy like Fitzpatrick brought up? That's not necessarily out of the question. But yes, the former president managed to basically kill a major piece of legislation, and it's going to be tough to see anything broad on immigration and the border because of that.
For sure, and the Senate leadership is starting to apparently come around on this now. That's one of the three Johns, I guess. I don't think Mitch McConnell is ever going to endorse Donald Trump. Maybe I'm wrong.
We'll see. That's Trump is effectively the head of the Republican Party right now. It's a lot of support for Trump among people who might have surprised you.
Well, I'll tell you, we talk about politics a lot. We talk about the appropriations process with you because that's your specialty. But you're a generalist as well. You're a political junkie. You're watching all this stuff. Imagine a world, and I keep hearing in this newsroom, there are two things that political journalists pine for every 4 years, or maybe more often. One of them is a contested convention. The other is a discharge petition. Of course, that could come anytime. Are we going to be in a world, pretend we're not on the air right now, where we get both this year?
Oh, man.
Wouldn't that be something?
That's tough to predict. The number of things that have happened or could happen this year that are so unusual. I'll admit, I'm a little more focused on the possibility of a shutdown that occurs during the State of the Union.
Right. So
maybe
now, look, I've asked a lot of folks this. We have less than a minute. Would that delay the speech? Does Joe Biden go back, do it from the White House?
It would be a massive embarrassment to cancel the State of the Union because you shut the government down. I have to think they would stick to it, and Biden would relish the opportunity to give a joint address and blame Republicans.
They can pay to keep the lights on in the chamber for that, right?
Yeah, Congress.
The cameras will work. Can you imagine the booing and the heckling on that night as well? Are you going to be there for it?
I don't think I'll be in the room, but I'll be around.
All right, meet me in Staten Hall. I'll be there. Let's get you on. We have special coverage that night, State of the Union, as well as Super Tuesday. Both of them are next week. We'll find out if a shutdown coincides, with a lot more to follow today on the fastest show in politics. Thanks to Jack Fitzpatrick, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
It's 1240 on Wall Street from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York. I'm Charlie Pellet. We're looking at a mixed Monday here with the S&P 500 index lower, little change, down less than 0.1% right now, falling by 4 points. The Dow higher and little changed, on track for a possible another record. We've got the Dow up 11 right now, up less than 0.1%, while NASDAQ higher by 27, a gain there of 0.2%. Small moves as traders brace for a barrage of economic data this week and remarks from Fed speakers that will help shape the outlook for interest rates. 10-year yield 4.29% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.72%. Spot gold down $8 the ounce to $2,027, lower today by 0.4%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.6%, $77.70 for a barrel of WTI. New home sales edged higher in January, and with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
New home sales started the new year with a 1.5% gain. Builders and buyers capitalized on lower mortgage rates last month. Prices fell. However, the Federal Reserve is in no rush to ease, and rates have been rising this month. Fed officials remain wary of the general inflation outlook. The home sales data are provided by the Commerce Department. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Today is the day that Amazon has entered the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Amazon shares up by less than 0.1%. Amazon in, Walgreens Boots Alliance out. Shares of the retailer down by 2.7%. Some of the world national stories that we're following for you at this hour. Former President Trump has filed notice that he is appealing New York State's $454 million civil fraud verdict over his asset valuations, kicking off a fight that could drag out the case for months or longer. Recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 4, down 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet, Joe Matthew. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, good to see you, and thank you. You can see Charlie yourself if you get on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Global News. You'll see our panelists as well and all the happenings here in the studio. It's a pretty cool thing we've got going here on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, and conversations you'll only hear and see on Bloomberg. So how does Donald Trump follow up the big win in South Carolina? He's making a run for the border. That's the news today. Brownsville, Texas. He'll be there Thursday, it looks like, in a bid to pressure Joe Biden, making us all feel like this general election really is on, even if Nikki Haley is hanging in through Super Tuesday. Joe Biden, by the way, up in New York, raising money today. He's going to sit down with Seth Meyers for a taping tonight, according to the Associated Press. This is all part of the Make Him Seem Young effort here, and affable. Of course, all the candidates have their opportunity to do that. And I'm glad to say we've got the panel back together. We're putting the band back together here on Balance of Power. Rick Davis, who was missed for a week, is back. Jeannie Shanzano is here too, Bloomberg Politics contributors, as we look at the results from South Carolina. It's great to see you both on a Monday, a new week with new opportunities. Rick, what will those opportunities be for Nikki Haley as we learn that the Koch brothers are turning their money in another direction? How important is this development coming out of a bruising loss in her home state?
Yeah, I think it's important to note their money was used to develop ground game. In other words, voter ID, get out the vote programs in these early primary states. So it will be missed, especially when you have this many states on the docket for the next week. And so I think that aspect of it will hurt turnout for Nikki Haley. I mean, there's no question that she overperformed her polling in South Carolina. So there was some note of optimism, but you have to attribute some of that to the Koch organization. It was on the ground, well-funded, and working to try and turn out the vote. So she's going to have to find new and exciting ways to get people to turn out. And this is pretty much a momentum play right now anyway. So I think her public statements will probably get more direct at Donald Trump. She was pretty tough on him in South Carolina.
Does she have at this point?
I think we're all sort of scratching our heads because very few people think she has a chance to win here. The way I see what she's doing is I think she is really planting a stake in the ground, and she is letting the party know that Donald Trump is likely to have his 5th loss in a row in 2024. And once that happens, if it does happen, she will be the person standing. Some people have said she is the Bernie Sanders of the Republican Party after Hillary Clinton loses in 2016 to pick up the pieces and say you can't be a losing party. I think that's a little bit of a challenging one, but the reality is there's no other sort of path for her at this point, barring Donald Trump imploding. And I am glad to hear Rick say that she overperformed, because she did. And this is the untold story of what happened on Saturday night. The polls were a bit off. She did overperform. And that, I think, speaks to the fact that Donald Trump has his work cut out for him, because he has a problem. He is sort of stuck in this 60%. That is a big number, 40% of Republicans in a primary in South Carolina, to go another way.
Well, it prompted John Thune to come off the fence here, Rick, and endorse Donald Trump. As we were discussing a little bit earlier in the program, that's getting awfully close to Mitch McConnell. How important is that endorsement? What does it tell you about the establishment part of the party in their view of Trump?
That does tell me a lot, Joe. John Thune's endorsement is very close to the leadership. He's one of the three Johns who may potentially become the next leader of the Republican Party in the United States Senate. And you have to assume it's a recognition of just the reality of the bandwagon that he's got going through these primaries, where he's just picking up these delegates and potentially could pick up enough on Super Tuesday to actually secure the nomination and make this a moot point. I would also say it's probably an effort to soften up some of the negativity that's existed between the Senate leadership and Donald Trump. The House leadership has gone in lock, stock, and barrel for Donald Trump, but the Senate leadership has kept their distance and have been the ones who've been endorsing other people in this primary along the way. And so this is, I think, a recognition that they need to get it straight with the next nominee of the Republican Party.
Well, the next conversation is going to be beyond when does Nikki Haley drop out, if she does, Jeannie. We're hearing from Joe Cunningham at No Labels, who says Haley is, quote, somebody we would definitely be interested in, unquote. If she comes through Super Tuesday, maybe wins a couple of states, but clearly cannot win the nomination when Donald Trump becomes the presumptive nominee, is that a conversation as a Republican that she should have?
I don't think so. Again, I think she knows the writing on the wall. She knows unless something happens and he implodes, he is going to be the nominee. So I don't see any other reason for her to be in this race, except that she really has an interest in, very much like Liz Cheney, saying to the Republican Party, you are headed in the wrong direction. In other words, she's trying to fix this party. And let's look at what's happening in this party. They have almost completely lost college-educated whites. And to Donald Trump's credit, he has picked up the working class, non-white, non-college educated voters. That's a big win for them. But it's hard to win a general that way. And so my view is she is not interested in No Labels. I'm sorry to tell them that. I think she loves the party she's in, and she wants to see it get healthier and better after this series of losses, which they may very well have again.
It's always indicative when you're under the Veep stakes here, Rick, and we saw a bit of a straw poll at CPAC over the weekend on that very issue. Donald Trump spoke Saturday and shook the building. We've only got a minute left, but the two names that rose to the top, Kristi Noem, Vivek Ramaswamy. Do you see either of those happening, Rick?
It's hard to tell at this point. I don't think any of them gives Donald Trump an extra vote. In other words, votes he doesn't already get. And I wouldn't think CPAC is particularly representational of the swing voters.
Fair enough. See, I don't know what CPAC represents, to be honest with you. At this point, Jeannie, National Harbor was studded with red hats on Saturday. I'm not sure that it's impacting election results, is it?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but geez, I hope you would swoop in and get one of those hats, Joe, and wear it on the air.
It's the white ones. Everybody wants the white hats from Iowa. Rick Davis told us about them first. But you'll have to look on eBay, I guess, for those. We're going to have more ahead with the panel. We'll put Congress in front of Rick and Jeannie coming up here to see if we're actually going to shut down Friday and what our options are for Mr. Speaker. It's next, only on Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pettit. We're keeping an eye on fresh pet shares. They are now surging 17% as the natural pet food maker forecasts better than expected net sales for 2024. Also, earnings per share beat Wall Street estimates. Right now, the stock is up by about 17.5%. Moderna shares lower by almost 5% after HSBC cut its rating on the stock to reduce a sell equivalent from hold, citing uncertainties to the drug maker's revenue. Moderna right now down by 4.9%. Intuitive Machine shares have plunged 37% after the spacecraft company said its lander, which successfully touched down on the moon last week, likely landed on its side. And with more on that story, here's Bloomberg's Kimberly Adams.
Charlie, there's been a lot of investor interest in this stock. Friday, it jumped 15.8% on word of the landing. Today's drop represents a pronounced reversal from the recent excitement over the Houston-based company's mission. As of its last close, the stock is up more than 350% off a January low. The landing was touted as a first by a private sector company to reach the moon intact, as well as the first U.S. spacecraft to reach the moon's surface since 1972. In a Friday press briefing, Intuitive Machines initially said the vehicle had landed upright, an incorrect belief it subsequently said was due to faulty data. Charlie?
And that's Kimberly Adams reporting. And shares of Intuitive, that uses the ticker symbol LUNAR, L-U-N-R, down now by 37%. An activist investor says the Walt Disney Company should appoint a corporate chief technology officer and focus on technology transformation. That, according to Blackwell's Capital. We've got Disney shares up by 0.1%. Those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
Get your countdown clocks ready. It does look like the government will begin shutting down Friday, unless, of course, Speaker Mike Johnson goes back on his vow to not pass another continuing resolution. That's what the wonks here call the stopgap approach to funding. It would buy us a couple of weeks, arguably, until they could figure something out. But, well, they haven't figured out anything yet. And this would be our fourth CR, I believe, by my count, in this fiscal year. Let's reassemble the panel for their take on things. Rick Davis is back with us today. Of course, Jeannie Shanzano is with us, too, Bloomberg Politics contributors. And, Rick, I don't know what to say here. We've been talking about it for weeks. Lawmakers left town. They're still gone. They won't have more than 3 days to solve this before the deadline. Do we need to start being real about a shutdown?
I think you have to be practical about it. Nobody's saying they want to shut down, but practically speaking, if you can't actually function as an entity, as a body, and actually do the work that the House of Representatives is supposed to do, then what's going to happen is you're going to accidentally go into a shutdown, and that is completely incompetent. So you're right. Since September, we've had 4 continuing resolutions. Looks like they're going to need another one. All kinds of talk about maybe a 1-monther to get it through this, current 2 deadlines of March 1st and March 8th. But the bottom line of it is there's nothing that seems to be an impediment to continuing to fund the government other than the inability of the Republican leadership to actually get votes.
Isn't that remarkable? So, Jeannie, it's a laddered CR that we're under right now. You've got some bills expiring on Friday and then the rest the following Friday. And the first round is the easy stuff. This is agriculture, FDA, energy, water, VA, HUD. The other stuff is a lot more intense. You're talking about the Justice Department, the Pentagon, Department of Homeland Security. If they can't figure out the first tranche here, what makes us think they could figure out the second?
Yeah, well, I am not holding out hope that they can figure out either. And of course, okay. I have to say, as much as this feels like we are rinse and repeat on this shutdown, this is our first ladder CR shutdown potentially. So some new excitement in the shutdown week watch. The reality is Yeah, I mean, right. The reality is that this is going to end at some point, and if you're a betting person, it's likely going to end the way the other ones ended, either a shutdown or we get a bipartisan coalition together to keep the government open. There's only really two options here, and I don't know. I'm glad they're all going to be talking at the White House, the leadership with the president. But for gosh sakes, what are they really talking about? This is about the House Republicans, the rules they put on themselves that have put us in this position of now, quite frankly, a bottleneck at the top that leadership doesn't have the power to break.
Well, so what do you think about that, Rick? The big meeting tomorrow, we've seen this movie before, too. Joe Biden gets Mike Johnson, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Hakeem Jeffries all over there. It's really just about Joe Biden and Mike Johnson, though, let's be honest. What is Joe Biden supposed to say? What the hell are you guys doing over there?
Well, this in this meeting is as much about the security spending package as it is the government spending package. And Joe Biden hasn't given up his efforts to try and get funding for Ukraine specifically. And so I think all these things are going to be on the table. The funky thing here is in Washington, most of what happens in this city is behind the scenes and based on relationships. It's not what you read about in the press. It's usually that one phone call that the president makes to the speaker, who they've served together for decades and known each other, through all kinds of thick and thin. And the reality is you don't have that here with Johnson. Speaker Johnson is a virtual unknown to the rest of his delegation, to the Senate, and to the President of the United States. And that's a wild card nobody can predict.
Partly how we got here, unclear how we get out of it. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us. They'll help us. Next hour, we're going to dig into that security package with a little bit more emphasis with Rick and Jeannie. We're hearing from President Zelensky on the number of dead in Ukraine, and the clock is ticking on that, too. Hour 2 starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
When will the money run out for Nikki Haley? Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the Koch network steers its cash to other races after Donald Trump completed the sweep of early states with a commanding win in South Carolina. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington, D.C., and Kaylee's Super Tuesday is only a week from tomorrow.
It is indeed. And of course, Nikki Haley still pledging to stay in this race through Super Tuesday. The question, Joe, is will she stay in it beyond, with, as you say, big money donors starting to turn away from her? And we've all been talking about how as long as she has the resources, why not still in the game? But if the resources start draining, it gets a lot harder to do so.
That's true. She's got 10 fundraisers scheduled between now and Super Tuesday. She's going to find out firsthand with these donors about what they think. All the while, we're watching, of course, what's happening or not happening on Capitol Hill. With the beginning of a shutdown, Kaylee, set for Friday, lawmakers will have only 3 days when they get back to deal with this.
Yeah, it's not a lot of time. And frankly, when they said they might have the text of a deal released over the weekend, and that did not happen, I think the odds of a partial shutdown probably ratcheted just that extra bit higher, and they might have been high from the get-go. And that's not even to discuss supplemental funding as well, the geopolitical considerations they have to grapple with here as well, including funding for Ukraine and Israel.
Yep, absolutely. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our political panel, will be with us later this hour to talk about that Ukraine funding. We'll be joined as well by Laura Davison at Bloomberg, and Andrew Smith from the University of New Hampshire Survey Center is going to be with us. He's doing research beyond New Hampshire now to try to answer a lot of the same questions we're asking.
Yeah, what are the polls signaling? And frankly, judging by South Carolina, the polls to this point have looked pretty accurate, at least when it comes to the dominance of the frontrunner, Donald Trump. So we've got a lot ahead for you here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. First, though, as always, we got to get a check on the markets, and Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has that from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kayla Lyons. And earlier gains for the U.S. stock market, they have fizzled. Right now, we are looking at a down day for both the Dow and the S&P. NASDAQ holding on to an 8-point gain, but the S&P 500 index right now down 8, drop there of 0.2%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 21, drop there of 0.1%. 10-year at 4.30% with a 2-year now yielding 4.72%. Traders are bracing for a barrage of economic data and remarks from Fed speakers that will help shape the outlook for interest rates. Again, the 10-year right now at 4.30%. We've got gold down 0.3%, 2,029 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.9%, 77.95 for a barrel of WTI. Members of the Walton family sold roughly $1.5 billion worth of Walmart stock at the end of last week. The shares hovered near a record, Walmart up by 2% today. World national news briefly. Sweden has cleared the final obstacle to gaining NATO membership in a move that will solidify the alliance's grip over Northern Europe and the Baltic region. And Israel's central bank has left interest rates unchanged, opting against a second straight cut because of concern that inflation might accelerate again as the war against Hamas continues. Again, recapping, stocks are mixed. S&P lower right now by 6 points, down 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington once again. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
Charlie Pellet, always looking at the way money is moving on Wall Street. Thank you so much. And of course, Joe and I have our eye on the way money is moving when it comes to electoral politics. And how much money might be left for Nikki Haley as the Koch network and others like Ken Griffin, who had supported her in the past, are turning their eyes down the ballot because at this point it's almost all but a given that Trump is going to be the nominee.
That's the real sign, right? I mean, she can stay in this race until the convention, presumably, but when the money dries up, when the donors start to act like the general election has begun, that's about as close to a bell ringing as we're going to get. The question is, are we really there yet?
It seems like we might be there. We might have a better idea of whether or not we're really there next Tuesday.
Yeah, that's right.
Super Tuesday.
Super Tuesday, yes. Look, some important states in play here, obviously. How many of them could she potentially win remain big questions. And then against the backdrop of the money, it's not getting easier. So we wanted to bring in Laura Davison to talk about this. Bloomberg News politics team leader. Laura, we got through South Carolina. Unheralded, by the way, we do need to acknowledge the unprecedented feat that Donald Trump just pulled off. New Hampshire, Iowa, yes, the Virgin Islands, Nevada, and South Carolina, all with commanding leads. Now we move on to Super Tuesday, and the money's starting to move. Laura, how much time does Nikki Haley have?
Even herself, she's admitted that she has about, a week, 10 days here. She said late last week that her campaign hasn't even thought about what comes next after Super Tuesday, which is sort of a signal that she's nodding that, that at that point they may be looking to get out of the race. She, of course, is continuing to campaign. She has this aggressive schedule all week, but beyond that, she has no plans announced publicly.
But she's still raking in money, even if the money's not coming from the Koch network, right? She raised, $1 million immediately after her 20-point loss in South Carolina. Is that all small money donors?
Yeah, well, and, depends on your definition of small dollar. Where Nikki Haley is losing folks are the people who are giving, millions of dollars. She's still holding fundraisers all this week, 10 fundraisers over the course of 10 days that, to attend is somewhere between, $1,000, $5,000, sort of in that range. So she's bringing in money, but not the big amounts of money that she needs to make these massive ad buys. And at this point, she's sort of sustaining her campaign, keeping her folks on payroll, but they're not, making big new advances into states, later in March, for example.
10 fundraisers between now and Super Tuesday is pretty remarkable, considering that some of the money is already turning. Are these guarantees, Laura? What happens inside these fundraisers? These are folks who already paid to attend, right? Or is Nikki Haley going to start getting firsthand reminders of how difficult this is?
This is, a chance for a lot of her supporters who say, they acknowledge that, she may not be the nominee, or in some cases know that she's not going to be the nominee and publicly acknowledge that. But they see this as a chance to sort of build Haley up for the future. She's 52 years old. She very well could run for president again in 2028. It's possible she, as it seems unlikely now, but possible she serves some role in a Trump administration. So they're sort of keeping her close to them, making sure that they have her, that she has their interest in mind as she moves forward.
Yeah.
What else is interesting about the idea that Nikki Haley donors are no longer going to be Nikki Haley donors and are eyeing elsewhere? It doesn't mean that they're going to Donald Trump, Laura, at least a lot of these big money individuals that we're talking about that weren't supporting him already. It doesn't seem like they're deciding to allocate their resources now to the general election. And we know that Trump's financial picture, given all of his legal battles, isn't exactly peachy keen. How precarious is his money situation looking if he's already having to compete in what everybody's assuming is just general election politics at this point?
His money situation is not good, particularly when you look compared to Biden, who hasn't really had to run much of a campaign so far. He's been able to stockpile cash. He does have the support of all the big, deep-pocketed donors on the Democratic side. That's where Trump really falls short. I mean, he has a handful, but you have folks like Ken Griffin, Steve Schwartzman, who consistently, year after year, are the biggest donors to the Republican Party. And they have said, look, we're going to donate to folks like Congress. We're going to look at some of these competitive Senate races. But Trump has not been able to win any money from them yet, which could be a huge issue, as he has, roughly about a third of the cash that Biden has on hand, and he has a lot to spend on legal bills going forward.
All right, Bloomberg's Laura Davison, our deputy team leader for U.S. politics. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. And as we talk about how Trump decisively won South Carolina, as he's decisively won every primary contest thus far, it's worth keeping in mind, and Nikki Haley pointed to this, Joe, roughly 40% of Republican primary voters, or primary voters, as there's independents in this mix as well that we should consider, are not picking him. And he's essentially an incumbent Republican.
That's true. If you look at this from the incumbent standpoint, it might not be as impressive, I guess, to see him win all of the early states. Joe Biden's winning his as well, but you don't look at it because he's the president.
And so it raises a question of how those primary voters may translate into general election voters. And on that note, we want to bring in Andrew Smith now of the UNH Survey Center. He is the director there. Andrew, always great to see you and get your expertise far beyond New Hampshire, of course, a state that Trump also won. Where do those 40% of voters who did not vote for Trump in a primary, where are they likely to go in a general election?
Well, the great majority of them are likely to go and vote for Trump in a general election, presuming that he's the candidate. People have a great ability to rationalize why their party skunk is better than the other party skunk. So I imagine a lot of those voters will go to vote for Trump because they aren't engaged in politics that much, and they're going to vote for their team, and that is the Republican Party. The biggest problem that Trump has is not that they're going to go over and vote for Biden, but that they just won't show up. And turnout, I think, is really going to be the key issue in determining who wins the election this fall. It's essentially a replay of almost the last two presidential elections. And turnout of a few percentage points in key states makes the difference between who wins and who loses. And if, say, 5% of those Republican voters who voted for Haley don't show up in November, Donald Trump will lose.
So where's your head on this race, Andrew? We left New Hampshire talking with you about a general election that was already beginning. It's really looking like one now. You've got Trump and Joe Biden both at the border on the same day. They're now referring to each other directly. How long can this last for Nikki Haley as, the potential alternative? She's in there just in case something goes wrong with the Trump campaign, it seems. But when does that start to look ridiculous?
Well, I think you're right that she's in there in case something happens, but that means that you're campaigning where you're relying on something that's completely out of your control, and that's not a good place to be in. My sense is this: her campaign is really all over but the crying, to use a phrase. She can stay on until Super Tuesday, see when the money runs out. I think that's going to be the key issue. But to the point of your last guest, that I think she is somebody who the Republican Party, or kind of the mainstream of the old Republican Party, is looking forward to as a potential candidate in 2028, presuming that Trump is already the nominee this time around. So she can go on for a little bit more, but I just don't think she really has any avenue to winning the nomination unless something really dramatic happens to Trump. And I don't even think that's a conviction in a court case. I think it's going to have to be something, a health-related thing, or something that really prevents him from being able to run.
So when you see polling, like some that we've conducted here at Bloomberg with Morning Consult, that suggests that voters, specifically swing state voters, would be less likely to vote for Trump if he were to be convicted of a felony, you don't necessarily think that matches reality?
Well, it may match reality right now, but again, the election's a long time away, and people are not in an election framework. By the time the election comes around, you're going to have so much mud thrown by both of these candidates that I have a feeling that both parties are just going to hold their nose and vote for the R or the D, not necessarily for the candidate who's running. It's really way too early. We've not seen an election like this where the nominees have been identified this early on. Where there's really not much going to be going on between now and then, except a battle between the top two people that's just going to get uglier and uglier. And maybe that's what I fear it's going to get, but it's not going to be something that's really illuminating and a sparkling example of American democracy.
We're spending time with Andrew Smith, political scientist and head of the UNH Survey Center. When we were in New Hampshire with you, Andrew, the idea was that this state was unique because of the independent vote, that if Nikki Haley were to outperform anywhere, it would be here. Her campaign pointed to South Carolina in the same way. What did we learn from the demographic breakdown and the party breakdown in the Palmetto State here to try to gauge success and failure moving forward?
Well, Haley has done okay with the protest vote. Essentially, Trump is going to get the majority of the mainstream Republicans, registered Republicans, and Haley's had to rely on people who are not the mainstream part of the party. And obviously getting 40% of that, frankly, is pretty good. And she got over 40% here in New Hampshire, which is pretty good, but it's certainly not enough to win. But I think the problem that we have to look at this is that Trump hasn't been able to win convincingly really anywhere. He's won, but he is, as you say, he's the incumbent. He should be able to win this by 80 to 90%, like Biden is able to do against, say, a Dean Phillips. What that tells me is that you've got just a deeply divided Republican Party that wishes it had somebody else, but it doesn't see that there is any alternative to Trump at this point.
Andrew, you just mentioned that Biden has been able to secure 80 to 90% of the vote. Do you think he'll be able to do that in the Michigan primary tomorrow, knowing that Arab Americans specifically there are suggesting they will be backing uncommitted instead of the president because of the issue of Gaza and his role in supporting Israel in that war effort against Hamas?
Yeah, I think Biden will be fine in the primary election. The Arab vote is very important, but it's important in just a few places in the state. And in a very close statewide election, whether or not they show up and vote is going to be a difference. But in a Democratic primary, I think Biden has all the controls of the party establishment itself. So I think he'll win handily there in Michigan.
What does it tell you when you start to see the money turn here, Andrew? This is a big headline for Nikki Haley. Koch brothers money is going down ballot, which was really helping to breathe life into her ground operation specifically. She's not going to have that moving forward now. You're used to people asking you every 4 years when people are going to drop out. Give us the anatomy of the end of this campaign.
Well, you stop running when the money runs out. That's the ultimate truth of it. And I think the money is slowing down dramatically. And in fact, Haley needs so much money to counter Trump. In fact, I don't even think there's an amount of money that she could spend that would really effectively counter Donald Trump, because he is so well known to the electorate and to the Republican primary electorate. To convince them otherwise, I think there's almost no amount of money that could make that case. But she's not going to have the money just to keep the people going in her staff for too much longer. So I think that she's likely to go through Super Tuesday. She's been pretty honest by saying that she says she was going to be in South Carolina. She's there. She said she was going to be there at Super Tuesday. She's likely going to be there, but I just can't see her really practically going on much longer than that. About half of the delegates are going to be awarded on Super Tuesday, and it's going to be hard for her to win just anything but a fraction of those.
Andrew, we just have about a minute left with you, but it strikes me that we always knew Nikki Haley was going to be a long shot candidate. We knew that she was gaining momentum, yet we knew that Trump was still far and away ahead in pretty much every poll across the board, all of which at this point seem to have proven pretty accurate. Is this the most accurate election cycle you've seen in terms of polling in some time?
Yeah, polling in primaries, it's really it's a little bit of a crapshoot. You don't know what you're going to get because you don't know who's going to show up. But this has been a fairly straightforward primary going for, even including the Iowa caucuses, which are really quirky.
Yeah.
But I think the poll's been pretty accurate, largely because you essentially have an incumbent, and people are either going to vote for the incumbent or not. And now that Haley's the only one left, it's really just the two-person race. The biggest problem in primary polling always is who's going to show up, and I think that's one of the reasons that you see Trump's numbers overestimated a little bit.
Remember this conversation a week from tomorrow. Again, that'll be Super Tuesday. Andrew Smith, great to see you. Post New Hampshire. He's the director of the University of New Hampshire Survey Center and a reliable voice, Kaylee, on all things politics. Bringing the panel next.
Indeed.
Rick and Jeannie are on the way for their take on what's happening in Washington. This is...
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 121 the time right now on Wall Street. U.S. stocks trading mixed. We have got the Dow, the S&P, both lower. Stocks are meandering, little changed. NASDAQ holding on to a 12-point gain, up now by about 0.1%. Bottom line here, U.S. stock market is wavering near records as traders brace for a barrage of economic data, along with remarks from Fed speakers that will help shape the outlook for interest rates. S&P down 7 now, down 1 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 14, little change there. NASDAQ up 10, a gain of less than 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.30% with a 2-year 4.73%. Gold down $5.50 the ounce to $2,029, drop there of 0.3%, while West Texas Intermediate crude is up 1.8%, $77.84 for a barrel of WTI. Briefly, world national news, stories that we're monitoring right now. Former President Trump has filed notice that he will be appealing New York State's $454 million civil fraud verdict over his asset valuations, kicking off a fight that could drag out the case for months or longer. And Sweden has cleared the final obstacle to gaining NATO membership in a move that will solidify the alliance's grip over Northern Europe and the Baltic region. Recapping, stocks are mixed. S&P down 8 at 5,080, a drop now of 0.2%. Balance of Power continues. Once again, your hosts, Kaylee Lines and Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet with his check on the markets. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, here at Bloomberg Television and Radio on Balance of Power, I'm doing my hourly or so check on Trump's True Social feed just to see, what the former president is talking about. His topic of choice for the last couple hours, it seems, Joe, is about the border.
Shocker.
Crooked Joe Biden's border invasion is destroying our country and killing our citizens, the former president says. And of course, he says this as he gears up on Thursday to make a trip to the border himself. And guess who else is going to the Texas border on Thursday?
This is going to be quite the split screen. Now, Donald Trump's going to Eagle Pass, right? Joe Biden, also making a run for the border, will be in Brownsville, Texas. And it really does remind us that it feels like the general election is already underway here. Nikki Haley, incidentally, will not be at the border on Thursday. But it brings us to the conversation about security funding. Think Ukraine, think Israel, Taiwan, the funding that has not cleared the House of Representatives, in part because of this whole border battle. And that's where we start with our panel today. Rick Davis is back with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, alongside Jeannie Shanzano. And it's great to see both of you with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is all one big story, Rick Davis, and I wonder your thoughts on the optics at the border and the impact they may have on this spending request for Ukraine and our other allies.
Well, I think both candidates see the importance of it, certainly in the polling data and around the country. Every town hall you go to, people talk about the out-of-control border and immigration and how it affects them, from New York to Chicago to L.A. to other small towns and border communities. I mean, it's everywhere in the news. And so these candidates have to address it. I would say Donald Trump's trying to regain an offensive move here. This has been a disaster for Republicans just prior to the 2-week recess, where the House passes a strong border bill attached to these security agreements with Ukraine and Taiwan, and it falls flat on dead ears. And the House has had to really try desperately to not look like the impediment to future border efforts. And Donald Trump, that's baggage for him. He's got to shrug that off, having used the House as his weapon of choice, and find a way to talk positively about it. And of course, this has all been manna from heaven for the White House and President Biden and his campaign. So he's got to go down there and try and cement some of that. And I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't some White House announcements on, Joe Biden's get tough efforts and executive orders that he could write.
Well, gee, that was the exact question I was going.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
The following week, if indeed it does happen, if the government is open, and it does happen, because the president is reading the same polls we are. We just had a Monmouth poll out today. 6 to 7 out of 10 Americans describe the border as one of the most important issues in their vote.
and I'm the inventor of the gel razor. And today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the gel razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype or manufacturing possibilities with investment or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I developed the all-in-one. The idea is you pressurise the handle, the gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blades, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September. With copyright protection, I have a logo for the gel razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
Fight in the Pacific, and anybody who looks at this with that point of view, they would never oppose funding and want to do it immediately for Ukraine.
But Rick, how great is the number, do you think, that really is fundamentally opposed to additional aid for Ukraine? Are we talking the select few here, which in the House of Representatives has great ability to disrupt, or do you really think this is the prevailing thinking in the House Republican Conference right now?
Well,
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
But why not an address to the nation? If not from the Oval Office, Joe Biden does it from the border. He's going to be down there, could connect all of the dots on what you and Rick are talking about. Why not do that address from Brownsville, Texas on Thursday?
Yeah, I hope he does speak to the nation. I don't know if he will, but I think it is an important point because he's got to be making this case over and over again. He's got to tell the House of Representatives they need to go back to the Hastert rule. If there is a majority support for a bill, they will vote on it. He has to also make the case that this has been an enormously effective use of U.S. financial foreign aid. You know, you think about it. We have not had one fighter on the ground. We have not lost any lives. What have we done? We have exposed Vladimir Putin. We have shown that the West will push back, that the democratic nations of the world are joined, and that we will not turn aside. That's what we were showing at the beginning. With the House Republicans and this juggernaut of these few people, we are telling Vladimir Putin he was absolutely right, that he could wait the West out, we would grow tired and turn inward. That's the argument the president has to make. And oh, by the way, 80% of this money stays in the U.S. So there's an economic point to make. There is a security point to make, and you can't just make it once. You've got to shout it from the rooftops over and over again. So I hope he does that when he's in Brownsville, and I hope he does it every minute afterwards, because the president is the one who needs to lead this charge.
Well, and it raises the question of the ones who need convincing, as Rick was just talking about. Maybe there's over 300 members of the House who actually would vote for Ukraine aid if it was indeed on the floor. When he's in that meeting that Joe was mentioning tomorrow at the White House, it really seems the only one of the big four who need to be convinced on this is Mike Johnson, because Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, has been vocally in support of Ukraine, and Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, of course, are aligned with the president on this. Jeannie, what can be done to change the mind of a House Speaker when we're not completely clear what his mind, what his thinking actually is on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, that he is being lorded over by Donald Trump, who doesn't want to see this pass. He doesn't want to see anything past the House at this point, given the fact that he is running against Joe Biden. So I think one thing the president could do is he could try to work with Johnson to say, we will give you cover on a discharge petition. Look at what Gottheimer and people like that were putting forward. He, needs to make that case. Mike Johnson has publicly stated he supports funding for Ukraine. And so I think we have to get publicly over and over again the president to ask him to respond publicly on why then he is not moving forward. And if it is immigration, as we heard this weekend from Republicans, then they have to remind the speaker and the rest of the caucus that they put a bill forward that was tough on security. So, you're looking at all the powers the president has. They are the powers to persuade, and he's going to have to do it publicly. Even though he's meeting behind closed doors with Mike Johnson, it's the public pressure that's important at this point.
All right, Rick Davis, 1 minute left. What's the strategy after that White House meeting for Mike Johnson? They're all going to go out to that reporter stakeout in the driveway. Does he eviscerate Joe Biden to please his conference in the House?
Look, I think he's going to have to talk tough, because he has the right flank that he's got to throw some red meat to. But the reality is he's going to have to pivot and have a plan to actually take a vote. I can't imagine a scenario where he doesn't take a vote before the end of this week on either a CR or all of the above.
Wow, there you have it. On a Monday from Rick Davis. We can play the tape back, but he tends to know. Rick and Jeannie, great conversation. Jeannie Shanzano, our Bloomberg Politics contributor, alongside Rick Davis every day here on Balance of Power. Thank you for the insights, as always. We're going to delve into the prospect of a government shutdown arriving as soon as Friday with an expert coming up. Mark Goldwine from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget will be with us. He doesn't like anything he's seeing right now. This is Bloomberg.
From the UK, and I'm the inventor of the gel razor. And today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the gel razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype or manufacturing possibilities with investment or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I developed the all-in-one. The idea is you pressurise the handle, the gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blades, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September. With copyright protection, I have a logo for the gel razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
All right, Charlie, doing God's work in New York. We thank you. From the nation's capital, Kaylee Lyons and Joe Matthew here. This is Balance of Power, the fastest show in politics. And, you know, it's interesting. We talk about different topics and ideas throughout the course of an hour. in this particular hour, they all intersect.
Yeah.
We're at the point now where you cannot remove the tentacles from the campaign trail to the White House to Capitol Hill, where, of course, Donald Trump is impacting the outcome of a number of debates right now.
Yeah, as he has the ear of the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, and it's not really clear exactly what Mike Johnson might be thinking about the looming deadline to avoid a partial government shutdown.
Correct.
Come the end
Has
of
Trump
this
weighed
week.
in on that? We don't have a Truth Social on shutdown yet.
No, a lot on the border,
Stand by,
some
though.
other things. But yes, definitely stand by because, of course, the House still isn't back. They come back to town on Wednesday, and then they'll have to race over the course of just 3 legislative days to try to avert this. Reminding everybody, this is a partial government shutdown potentially. Just 4 appropriations bills are the ones that are supposed to pass to avert this. They're supposed to be the easy ones, Joe.
These are the
other 8
non-controversial bills.
are the hard ones.
That's true, yes. So the countdown clocks will be running here. And we're going to do this twice. Although if we shut it down, if we start shutting down Friday, I would submit we're going to be in much more trouble the following week. Because to your point, you know, doing the HUD bill or the FDA bill is a lot less controversial than, say, the Pentagon or
When
Justice
you're talking
Department.
defense, the big bulk of government spending on the aid, that's where it gets really tricky. But of course, this is all tricky already. So on that note, trying to work through the trickiness is Mark Goldwine, who is joining us now from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, where he is Senior Policy Director. So Mark, how do you see this going down? What odds are you personally putting on a partial shutdown by the end of this week?
I really try not to put odds on this stuff, but it's relatively high. Remember, the shutdown would happen midnight Friday, so it really wouldn't matter until sometime on Monday. But I think it's likely we have that little shutdown and that we try to pass these individual appropriations bills and then probably a kick the can for that second set of bills so that they don't have a larger shutdown or a particularly long one.
You're, of course, again, at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. That's the name on the door, Mark. Is it possible we don't get a responsible federal budget for this entire fiscal year? Because they're talking about CR for the duration at this point.
Well, it seems like we haven't had a responsible federal budget in some time. But yeah, it's possible we don't get any appropriations. I do think if they go the route of permanent continuing resolution, sort of kick the can, they're going to have to make so many adjustments to it that it'll almost look like a hybrid between a continuing resolution and an appropriations. But it is possible they can't get all their act together on the real true appropriations.
Well, and of course, if they don't, come the end of April, that's when the 1% sequester kicks in. 1% cuts to everything across the board, defense included. And when you're talking about defense that has a significantly larger budget, that 1% is worth a lot more than for other appropriations. Can you just remind us, walk us through what would really happen to the government financing if that 1% sequester kicks in? What would be detrimentally affected?
Well, here's the reality. A 1% sequester by itself is actually not that big a deal, and most of the agencies could bear it because they've been on the CR. The problem is twofold. The first is it's actually more than 1% right now on the non-defense side because of some weird stuff related to veterans and receipts. So it's actually more like a 5%. But the other is if we do a permanent CR, we don't actually get those 1% sequester. What we get is no sequester for defense and something closer to a 10% sequester on the non-defense. And trying to cut 10% of your budget in just half the year is just not doable. The only way is really significant rolling furloughs for many of the agencies.
Wow. Well, I mean, you'd think that would be quite a deterrent, Mark, but it seems to me defense spending will be the matter that makes a difference, right? When the Hawks get a hold of this is going to be an ugly debate on Capitol Hill.
And with defense spending, it's less the level and it's more the stagnation, that if you do the CRs, you can't actually make new choices about what contracts to enter into and things like that. So with the Defense Department, it's really the flexibility that matters maybe more than the actual level of spending.
Well, and of course, as Joe and I were discussing, the first week of March is going to be pretty wild because, of course, you have this March 1st deadline, you have the March 8th deadline in terms of government funding, and smashed in between, the president is supposed to be giving his State of the Union address. to a joint session of Congress on March 7th, so the eve of the deadline for the bigger chunk of appropriations bills that need to pass. And then just a few days after that, he's supposed to be giving his budget for the next fiscal year, when we still haven't sorted out, as Joe was alluding to, the budget for this current fiscal year. When the president outlines his policies, what should those policies look like to be more fiscally responsible?
Yeah, and I also heard there's some election stuff happening in that same time that we've been worried about.
Yes,
indeed.
Well.
Yeah, I mean, look, we are deeply in debt. Interest this year is projected to be larger than the defense budget and larger than Medicare. It's expected to be the second largest government program, which is nuts if you think about it. So I hope the president comes forward with significant deficit reduction. Doesn't mean balancing the budget, doesn't mean paying off the debt, but at least getting us $5-8 trillion so the debt isn't growing much faster than the economy. And that's going to have to come from tax revenue, which actually this president's been pretty good about talking about. And it's going to have to come from spending cuts, which this president hasn't really talked about at all, especially in the healthcare system, where there's so much waste that I think we could cut trillions of dollars and not even really miss it.
We haven't talked about raising revenues yet. Mark, is that a joke?
Well, I mean, actually, I just said the president's actually been pretty good on this issue. I do think he only wants to raise taxes on the 2% of Americans making over $400,000. I think it's a little silly that if we have a bad tax break, we want to leave it into effect for somebody making $399,000. But this president actually in his last budget put forward about $3 trillion of net tax increases, maybe even a little bit more. And I hope he'll put forward more this time, because they got to be on the table so that we can discuss them, figure out which ones are good, which ones are bad. And ultimately, we're not going to be able to solve the debt without raising substantially more revenue than what we're projected to.
Mark, just in our final minute with you, we're obviously here on Bloomberg Television and Radio, where both Joe and I have taken note that markets at this point don't seem that concerned about fiscal risk that may be out there. A partial shutdown is not really reflected at all, it seems. What would you tell the markets about how worried they should be about fiscal conduct on Capitol Hill?
Well, look, a shutdown itself, it's disruptive, but it's just not it's not a macroeconomic activity that's going to fundamentally change the economy. And so even if I were worried about shutdown, I wouldn't be worried about its effects. What I worry about is what it means for the ability of Congress and the president to solve other larger problems, right? Our debt is as large as the economy. And if we can't even keep the lights on, how are we gonna solve these major issues? And if we can't solve the major issues, then we are in big trouble. And I think you're starting to see that a little bit in the interest rates.
Hey, Mark, it's great to see you. Mark Goldwine at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Thanks for the insights here and the fair warning, as it does look like we could, in fact, be headed for a shutdown starting Friday, Kaylee. Then we'll see where we are by the next Friday.
This whole laddered thing is complicated.
Be made complete. It's getting a little bit confusing here. We've got to turn to the chips, though. Everybody's talking NVIDIA on Wall Street. They're talking chips here, too, Kaylee. The CHIPS Act money. We'll have that next, only on Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio. You're listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
So, Kaylee, you look at the Bloomberg and all you can see is NVIDIA from here to the horizon. It's been one of the remarkable stories of not just this past earnings season, but the past couple of years for NVIDIA. Yeah. And it's a big Washington story as well, because we're talking about the AI chips that the White House, that the Commerce Department does not want to fall into the hands of China. But it's been amazing to see the whole chip industry flourish with this incredible AI narrative. And it's making me wonder, if they're printing money like this on Wall Street, why do they need all the CHIPS Act money to make semiconductors here?
Well, the supply is still having difficulty meeting the demand. That is what NVIDIA said after earnings last week, is that demand is so strong and they just frankly can't keep up with it at this point. And in part, that's really what the Biden administration is trying to do. The problem is this isn't an overnight thing. They're giving out loans and grants and the like for these projects that will take years to develop.
Now,
for
this is reshoring, right?
Ramped up, right.
For those of us playing
at home
along.
In the U.S.,
reshoring.
Yes. Correct.
Very expensive, apparently. And they all want more money.
Yeah, Gina Raimondo, the aforementioned Commerce Secretary, was actually speaking earlier today and said that U.S. chip firms want about $70 billion in these U.S. incentives, but we're talking what's available, $39 billion in grants, and then another $75 billion in loans, in guaranteed loans. So
maybe they should
it's a
sell
limited
their NVIDIA stock.
Pot of money and a lot of demand for it. And this is something that our very own Mackenzie Hawkins, who reports on economic policy here at Bloomberg, has been covering. In fact, she was there in person for Secretary Raimondo's speech earlier today, and she's joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Mackenzie, the demand certainly is there. How quickly are these U.S. funds going to be allocated, and to whom?
So the U.S. passed and Biden signed the CHIPS Act into law in August 2022.
Right.
We're now, a year and a half on from that, and we're just really starting to see the money trickle out the door. The Commerce Department has announced 3 grants so far. Smaller scale grants. The most recent one was a bit bigger, $1.5 billion to Global Foundries, focused on what we call mature node or legacy chips. These are older versions of semiconductors that go into everything from your windshield wipers to your phone to also nuclear missiles. But a big part of Washington's focus is getting advanced cutting-edge chip capacity in the U.S. That's the types of chips that are made by Intel, by a Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company, by Samsung, which are all building massive chip-making facilities that cost, well over $10 billion, sometimes $20 billion to construct. And that's the money that we expect to start seeing flowing out the door over the next couple of weeks.
So to that end, Intel delayed its big foundry project in Ohio recently, right? Talking about the need for funds to be distributed, and I know they probably have some of their own issues as well. But does the announcement today do anything to help shore up that project and others like it that you're describing?
So, Intel has a $20 billion project in Ohio, also a $20 billion expansion in Arizona. TSMC is building a $20 billion facility in Arizona. Massive, massive construction projects that take years to come online. So you've seen in a couple of instances a sliding schedule by a quarter, maybe 2 quarters from some of these big companies that they say is not out of the ordinary. Now, there are exceptions to that. TSMC, which is building in Phoenix, delayed one of its projects because of issues with local labor unions and the workforce supply. So it's not, a one-size-fits-all explanation for why we might start to see sliding schedules. But the way that the Commerce Department views this and these companies view this is a decades-long investment. The goal is for the U.S., so the Commerce Department has said, is to have 2 leading-edge manufacturing clusters by the end of the decade. Raimondo said today that she expects the country can produce 20% of the world's leading-edge logic chips by 2030. That's coming from 0. So there's a lot of progress that the country needs to make. Companies have certainly been getting restless about the CHIPS Act awards, but we didn't expect this to all happen all at once.
Yeah, sure.
Well, and to return to the point that there seems to be a lot more demand for CHIPS Act money than there actually is supply of those grants or of those loans. I know that Secretary Raimondo was speaking last week about potentially the need for a CHIPS 2, the idea that it can't just end here. How quickly could we see something like a CHIPS to actually become reality?
Oh, I mean, you guys cover Congress, so
enough.
you know the odds there. But I mean, she did say today to reach this 20%, U.S. global capacity goal by the end of the decade, we have enough money. But she's also said that the demand is staggering from companies like OpenAI, which are these massive Gen AI facilities take thousands and thousands and thousands of chips, and companies just can't keep up. So whether we'll actually get more funding from Washington, I think there would be good reason to be skeptical of that. But we currently have, $39 billion in direct grants. $28 billion of that, the secretary said today, is slated to go towards these advanced chip makers. Now, they've collectively asked for 70. So some people are going to wind up unhappy. More than 600 companies have expressed interest in CHIPS Act funding. There's not enough to go around for all those projects.
Got you. Amazing stuff and great reporting. Mackenzie Hawkins, thanks for bringing this to us because, boy, we spent a lot of time covering the debate around the CHIPS Act. My best answer to your question would be check back after the election, right? Can you
that's
imagine
a very fair point.
sequel passing in this cycle? Good to see you, Mackenzie, and thank you. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington as we send things to New York now. Carol and Tim standing by for Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master and Tim Stenevec. We're talking chips in D.C. here, Carol. How about you in New York?
Well, we're going to kind of go low tech, if you will, and about the
I love it.
non-tech company that is marching towards that $1 trillion mark. We're talking about Berkshire Hathaway, which, of course, reported over the weekend. Warren Buffett came out with his shareholder letter to investors, so it's something we're going to break down. We think it's kind of important.
They got a lot of cash. They just don't necessarily know what to do with it.
At an all-time high, I think.
Must be a nice problem to have.
Absolutely. Kaylee Lyons, I'll meet you 5 o'clock on the next edition of Balance of Power. Bloomberg Business Week starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on Bloomberg Radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenevec. And let's get to the setup at this hour on this Monday, February 26th. And Tim, U.S. financial markets, I think it's all about marching towards the Fed's favorite inflation gauge this week. We get that later on this week. And then in the interim, throughout the week, we have a bunch of Fed speakers, so we'll be dissecting every word that they say.
Yeah, I got a great roundtable in just a few minutes. Also, shares of Berkshire continuing their crawl toward the $1 trillion club. Carol, not going to happen today unless something changes in the next couple of hours, but we're going to break down the company's latest quarter and shareholder letter and also what Warren Buffett's saying about all that cash that they have on their balance sheet.
And we're going to get to a story, speaking of Berkshire and Warren Buffett, that came up, Tim, on your radar about a longtime professor at a Bronx medical school way uptown, also the widow of a top Buffett investor, the same person, about making a $1 billion investment to the school. It's all about training, I guess, the next round of doctors, if you will.
It turns out investing in Berkshire Hathaway quite a bit of time ago. Yeah, paid off. Hey, what hasn't paid off is Elon's Boring Company racking up safety violations. This is workers say they have to wade through deep puddles of toxic sludge.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. And the Koch network done funding Nikki Haley after this weekend as it and other billionaire GOP donors pivot down ballot. We know Kaylee and Joe were talking a lot about this. We're going to dig into this as well. But first up, we got to talk about the markets.
Hey, here's Charlie Bellet. He's got an update on today's business news and what the market's doing. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Happy Monday to you both. We are looking at a mixed market right now. Whole lot of nothing on the S&P, down 8, 5,079. Drop now of just about 0.2%. Little change there. Stock market losing steam near records as traders brace for a barrage of economic data, along with remarks from Fed officials that will help shape the outlook for interest rates. Right now, again, the S&P down 8, down 0.2%. The Dow down less than 0.1%, down 30 points right now. NASDAQ, though, holding on to a 17-point gain, up by about 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.29% with a 2-year at 4.73%. Spot gold down 0.3%, 2,029 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 1.5%, 77.62 for a barrel of WTI. Friday. Members of the Walton family sold roughly $1.5 billion worth of Walmart shares at the end of last week as the stock hovered near a record. Walmart up today by 1.5%. World and national news. Here's what you need to know. Former President Trump has filed notice that he is appealing New York State's $454 million fraud verdict over his asset valuations, kicking off a fight that could drag out the case for months or longer. Again, recapping stocks lower, S&P down 8 right now, drop of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Well, the economy back to the forefront this week with the Federal Reserve's favored inflation gauge. That is due on Thursday. That's expected, Tim, to show the biggest rise in about a year.
Yeah, we're just seeing, as Charlie mentioned, small moves in in stocks, bonds, and the dollar as traders brace for an overall barrage of economic data and remarks from Fed speakers that will help shape the outlook for interest rates and for equities.
All right, so let's get to the weekly setup. With us is Michael McKee, Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent right here in studio. And then in our D.C. bureau, we've got Bloomberg Economics chief U.S. economist Anna Wong. Mike, I want to start with you. The week ahead, PCE core on Thursday. Is it all about that report this week and then what we're expected to see, which sounds like it's going to be a little hot?
Well, it's primarily about that. The Fed is looking for an entire picture of the economy because they're not going to move in March. So they're sort of tracking everything. And we get some other numbers that will matter in durable goods orders, business spending, and the income and spending part of PCE, which will tell us something about consumer spending. So we'll get some idea of strength of the economy. Jobless claims, everybody's keeping a half eye on to make sure that that doesn't start going way up. So there's a lot of data that is worth looking at and incorporating into your worldview. None of it is going to be dispositive to the Fed. No surprise there. And I was asked earlier, people think because Friday is the first of the month that we'd get a jobs report, but the timing is not the first Monday or first Friday of the month. It's 3 weeks after the week that includes the 12th. Oh. So since February is a short month, we end up
leave it to the government
with the jobs report
make it a little
the
complicated.
following week. So you'll have to wait on that one.
That's okay. We got plenty of data this week to sift through, so I'm okay waiting another week for the jobs report. Hey, Anna Wong, come on in here because you and the team over at Bloomberg Economics have a great note out this week, and the debate that you're framing isn't necessarily between a soft landing and a hard landing. You're increasingly talking about a no landing scenario here. So break down what that is and why that's increasingly looking like the case, at least from your perspective.
Well, we actually think that a slowdown in economic growth is still the most likely. But what we are talking about in that note is that a lot of investors are increasingly talking about no landing because they see, for example, consumer sentiment rebounding. We are going to see that in the University of Michigan data this Friday, and also consumer sentiment data, consumer confidence is also rebounding. So, but I think overall, the data that Mike McKee just mentioned that we're going to get this week, for example, durable goods tomorrow, is going to show a pretty weak picture for January. We are expecting headline durable goods to contract by 5%, partly because Boeing only had 3 planes ordered in January. That is the lowest orders since 2020. And also we're expecting that the spending component in the PCE report this Thursday to show a sharp slowdown from the pace of spending from December.
Yeah, and I do think about, Anna and Mike, let me toss it back to you. I mean, just, backwards looking data versus maybe indicators that give us some idea of what's to come. I mean, how do you kind of parse through what really ultimately matters beyond then what's atop the Fed's list of what they prefer to look at?
Well, we don't have really forward-looking indicators. If we did, we'd have all bought Berkshire Hathaway how many years ago?
We would not be here.
But what you try to look at is composition of data, and if there's a shift in the composition of data, if there's something that is starting to go up in price and you can logically make the case that it will continue, then that's something to watch in inflation, for example.
Even like sentiment though, Mike? Like if you see, like I'm always curious about
sentiment's a tough one. What what studies have shown is that it is a sort of coincident indicator. It matches sort of what people's spending patterns are right now, but it doesn't tell you how they're going to spend in the future. So the famous Alan Greenspan quote was, "We watch what they say, not what they do." And that's kind of the thing. But there are some aspects of these confidence numbers that people look at, buying intentions, and the inflation numbers in the Michigan numbers. Those are used by the Fed as gauges of where people think things are going to go.
And Awan, come on back in here and go back to the call that you and the folks over at Bloomberg Economics are making about this idea of an economic slowdown this year. What is the data that you're seeing right now that you can point to that say, okay, this is why we think this is what's going to happen?
You know, I keep asking myself questions as, you know, Detective Danvers from True Detective Season 4 would ask, which is, what is the right question? And I think a very important question to ask ourselves is, why was the economy so resilient last year? And I think the answer is, number one, there was tremendous fiscal tailwind driven by the Biden administration's CHIPS Act and those industrial policies. And coming into this year, we see a lot of that tailwind turning into headwinds, because if you look at the primary deficit, it looks like the fiscal impulse would be marginally negative. Now, on top of that, in the non-farm payroll, we saw strength from state and government hiring last year, partly because of these education workers, right? That and now we're seeing a fiscal cliff facing municipal and state government, and lots of schools announcing layoffs, partly because the receipts are drying up and revenues are going down at the state level. So I think at the fiscal level, that will become a major headwind going into this year. The second factor I would say that is a major headwind to economic growth this year is credit. And we still have the big commercial real estate challenges with over $900 billion maturing this year, so in CRE loans. So I think those two would be the biggest headwinds to economic growth this year.
So, Anna, you guys think the most likely scenario is a slowdown. Does slowdown mean recession?
Well, I think it's going to be a very close one, Carol, because I think at the same time that we have these headwinds, we also have the fading impulse of monetary policy. There's the lags of Fed's rate hike. As you get into the middle of this year, it will start to dissipate. And so whether the fiscal headwinds will offset that, diminishing monetary impulse would be a big question. So it's going to be a close one.
Well, all right. So the other thing I want to layer on top of this, and Mike, I want to just throw one last question to you, all the Fed speakers. Anyone in particular that you think we should have on our radar?
This week it's kind of interesting because a lot of the people who are talking aren't going to be necessarily talking about monetary policy and macroeconomics, but we do get Rob Schmidt, the new president of the Kansas City Fed, in his first speech tonight. So people will be looking to see how he lays out his view of the economy. And John Williams, who's the vice chair of the Open Market Committee, will be speaking twice this week. People will be looking for that. But I don't think this week is going to matter all that much, even though there are like 14 different speeches, because next week, Jay Powell.
Yeah.
And everything, you'll have maybe the markets adjusting themselves little bits on all these Fed speaking, but the real moves are going to come when Jay Powell testifies before Congress.
So marking time a little bit ahead of
It's the main event.
It's the main
The
event.
main event. Yeah, everybody else is the warm-up.
When you're the Fed chair, that's what happens. All right, Michael McKean, Anna Wong, guys, thank you so much. So appreciate it. So let's go from our economic backdrop to a company that is often looked to, Tim, for its various businesses that can tell us a lot, too, about the macro business environment and just the macro environment overall.
Yeah, we're talking none other than Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire's earnings always closely watched as a proxy for U.S. economic health because of the expansive nature of Warren Buffett's businesses, ranging from Railroad, BNSF, Geico, Carol, and Dairy Queen.
So much going on, and the stock has been, it was moving closer to that $1 trillion mark, but not going to make it looks like today. Let's get more, though, on the quarterly update, what we heard from Warren Buffett. With us is Bloomberg Intelligence Property and Casualty Insurance Senior Analyst Matthew Palazzola. He's here in studio. Matt, good to have you here. Stock was up. We were closer to the $1 trillion mark, although we still had a ways to go. What was important about the quarter for this company?
So I'm not surprised that the stock didn't reach there today. I actually thought it would be down on the open.
Yeah, it was up 3%.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that. The quarter was fine. It wasn't really great positive. It wasn't really all that negative. I thought the insurance earnings were actually going to be a little better. They did carry the whole company, but I thought they were going to be a little bit better. If you peel back the onion on Geico, their expenses were a lot lower intentionally, which helped them out a lot artificially.
What do you mean intentionally?
So the auto insurance loss costs, meaning the cost of accidents, has risen dramatically since COVID.
Right, we've talked about this.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot, but from the context of how much it costs us in premiums.
Right, and so they're raising those premiums because their costs are going up more. They're losing money. So even no matter how much more you're paying, the auto insurance companies are still losing money the past couple of years. So what Geico did was they actually reduced a lot of staff. They reduced a lot of advertising. We looked at the run rate for the year, and they spent about $1.5 billion less than their run rate normal expenses just in Geico. So that propped them up a little bit too. I would say this though, I think the negatives were in the letter actually. So you've got the typical wit and wisdom of Buffett in there, which was great. He had a little homage to Charlie Munger, got a little dusty in my home office. But he talks kind of negatively about the railroad outlook and the energy outlook. So labor costs and energy and the regulatory environment, labor costs were in the railroad, and then the regulatory environment in energy. And those are go-forward issues, which will impact next year. So I think that's probably partially why the stock's selling off.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the balance sheet, because a big part of the story to emerge after Saturday's letter is the record pile of cash. I mean, we're talking $167.6 billion. The problem, and Warren Buffett's talked about this in the past, there's nowhere to put that money.
There's nowhere that can
I feel like
move
he's been saying that for years.
He's been saying that for a long time, and it's been true. So what has been the newer thing, I would say, in the past maybe 5 years is you're talking about private equity bidding up a lot of the companies that they're looking at. And they hadn't seen this level of competition in years. Besides the fact that you just need something gigantic to move the needle for them anyway. I mean, they bought Allegheny, was $12 billion. Their investments in these Japanese trading houses are now around $20 billion adjusted for currency, and that still doesn't move the needle. So I don't think we're going to see anything huge anytime soon.
But what about, oh, sorry, Carol.
No. Finish on that, because I want to go back to actually the railroads and energy.
I was going to say, what about increasing stakes in Occidental, for example, because they have the option to do that, or increasing stakes in other companies they have?
So he talks about it. I always thought they would buy Occidental, right? Now that was, I think, very widely speculated. They threw cold water on that last year at the annual meeting. He actually reiterated it in the letter that we're not going to buy the entire company. We love it, but we're not going to buy the entire company. I think they can. They probably will increase the stake in it as much as they can. He also called it a forever investment. So that one and the Japan trading houses. So I think you'll see stuff like that on the margin. The 13F came out a couple days ago. Before there weren't any dramatic new positions in there. So it's a great problem.
Apple a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it's a good problem to have, but a problem nonetheless.
Not buying NVIDIA, like it's not his new Apple or anything, right? No, it's not happening.
No, I don't think so.
Go back to, what we love about this company is that Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway tend to really invest in just kind of these core industries that often are, or tell us a lot about the economy. So energy, railroad, you said higher labor costs, and energy specifically?
Energy specifically, so there's the regulatory environment specifically on the West Coast. So there's the wildfires, right? And if the utilities end up causing these, they have to shoulder a lot of the cost for them. So two things. One, Pacific Corp, which they own, is involved in a bunch of litigation. They're settling. It's not hugely material for the company as a whole, right? It's a couple of billion here or there. It's not good for Pacific Corp, but it's not going to hurt Berkshire's financial strength. But what Buffett had said was, depending on how those fire costs end up, may determine if we want to make further investments. So it was kind of, if we get banged on this, we may not invest much more.
Well, that's what I think is interesting. He's not necessarily pulling the plug on it, right, or backing out, but it doesn't necessarily is going to pony up more money to it.
I don't think so. I mean, the other thing in the railroad you mentioned, the railroad is constantly consuming capital. It wasn't necessarily negative or that things were going poorly there. It was just specific to railroads. They were having labor shortages, one, and two, he kind of railed against the government getting too involved in the labor negotiations and saying those keep coming up and those will hurt the margin of Burlington Northern, which has trailed peers historically.
Just very briefly, 20 seconds, May 4th, 2024. That's when the annual meeting is. What's
Next
on your
focal
radar?
point.
Next, yeah, I want to hear more from Ajit Jain and Greg Abel. They'll be there. They were there briefly for the past 2 years, but it would be nice to hear a lot more from Greg.
You do wonder how he pulls those guys in. They obviously, right, are key now to the future of the company, but with Charlie Munger and what's happened and his passing, how he kind of relies on these guys, whether they become part of kind of the show, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they will. Honestly, Munger didn't even really talk much last time anyway.
All right, going to leave it there. Matt, thanks so much. Matt Palazzola, he's Property and Casualty Insurance Senior Analyst, covers Berkshire for our Bloomberg Intelligence team right here in studio. This is Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got the Dow, the S&P, they are lower. NASDAQ is advancing right now. Stock market losing steam near records with the S&P down 12 at 5,076, a drop right now of 0.2%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 32, a decline of less than 0.1%. NASDAQ continues to advance up 7 now, a gain there of just about 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.29% with the 2-year 4.3%. 0.73%. Spot gold today down 0.8%, $2,029 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 1.4%, $77.53 for a barrel of WTI. Domino's delivered in the latest quarter. Shares of Domino's Pizza higher after fourth quarter U.S. comparable sales beat expectations, bucking a trend among fast food chains. Today we did have shares of Domino's Pizza. They are up right now by just about 5.9%. Shares of Papa John's down by 0.4%. World and national news: Sweden cleared the final obstacle to gaining NATO membership in a move that will solidify the alliance's grip over Northern Europe and the Baltic region. The approval by Hungary's parliament today came 21 months after the Nordic country submitted its membership bid jointly with Finland in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Again, recapping, stocks lower. The S&P down 10 points now, a drop there of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, Tim, Elon Musk and EVs.
Check.
Elon Musk and satellites and space exploration via SpaceX.
Check.
Then there's the brain, Elon's Neuralink project.
Okay, some news there recently, too. So we can go ahead and say check, I think, at this point, but don't sign me up for it.
And what we haven't heard much about in a while is Elon's tunneling venture, the Boring Company. That is, until now.
I think it's fair to say uncheck on this one.
Exactly. Well, which is why our Bloomberg Business Week team had to do some digging around, no pun intended. They found out that the Boring Company's tiny Las Vegas loop is all that's come of Musk's promise and his promises overall to build super fast mass transit hyperloops. Workers say its tunnels, meantime, are packed with chemical sludge. This is a story by Max Chafkin and Sarah McBride of our Bloomberg News team.
Max is Bloomberg Business Week columnist, also contributor to the Elon Inc. podcast. A new episode dropping tomorrow on the Bloomberg Terminal and on Bloomberg.com/Elon Inc. Max is here in our
Is it called the sludge
studios.
episode?
It's a sludge special.
Since we talked about the sludge, we got to start with the sludge because it's actually kind of serious, pretty serious stuff.
We're laughing, but yeah.
Causes some pretty bad health effects.
Yeah, so I mean, the genesis of this story are these documents that we obtained, that Sarah McBride and I obtained from the state OSHA, that's the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, and it basically shows lots of complaints from workers about unsafe conditions, including this issue of like these toxic muck, which the workers say they've had to wade through. The reason it's toxic, it's not necessarily like they're doing something that's totally outside the norms of tunneling. These chemicals are sort of standard chemicals that are used, but the allegation from the workers is that corners are being cut, they're trying to move too fast, they're doing it on the cheap. You know, and the funny thing about this, or it's not really funny, but these are the things that Elon Musk has set out to do to some extent. Like the whole point of the Boring Company, like many of Musk's companies, has been to cut unnecessary costs. The thing that we're hearing with this story, however, and I think you see echoes of this elsewhere in Elon Musk's empire, actually, is that they're not necessarily finding lots of innovations there. They're ultimately ending up with a normal tunneling company, essentially, that happens to have a safety record that some would say is troubling.
Okay, so here's what's a little puzzling to me, Max. Elon Musk is a guy who's literally putting chips in people's heads. He's doing something that only until SpaceX did it, governments, taking a whole of government approach, could do. We've been able to dig tunnels for transportation purposes for over a century. Why is he running into so much trouble here?
So I think I wrote one of the first stories about this back in early 2017, talked to Elon Musk at the time about this. And just to put a slightly different spin on what you just said, and which relates to this, which is that SpaceX is not the first company, not the first private company to build rockets, right? The shuttle, all the things that NASA done were built by government contractors.
Right, but what I'm saying is he's doing it in a way that is really innovative. I mean,
well, yeah, 100%, very much.
Reusable stuff that was a real
innovative
innovation.
Contracting process. They used contracts. They sold them directly to the government at a fixed price, which was new. But one of the core things that SpaceX did was like go out and look for existing technology and find a way to improve on it and do it cost effectively. Now, there are a lot of potential inefficiencies in the world of aerospace, and Musk has had a much harder time in some other fields finding similar sort of levels of inefficiency, just sort of low-hanging fruit. And I think the tunneling example is one. You know, he talked about, back in 2017, he talked, you know, it costs $1 billion a year, and it takes a mile it takes a year to dig a mile, and it costs like $1 billion a mile, or some very large figure like that. And now boring is doing maybe a little better on cost, although it's hard to know. But when you look at the actual pace that they're going, it's basically a mile a year. It's not that much faster than existing tunneling projects. And when you look at the end result, we're not talking about mass transit. We're not talking about, big subway cars full of people, which is actually what many people in Las Vegas, would have hoped for, because traffic there is really bad. What we're talking about are Teslas, just normal cars that can take 3 people and a driver. They're not even driverless, and they're limited to 40 miles an hour. So we're so far away from the kind of grand visions. And just to remind people, what Elon Musk originally promised here was New York to D.C. in 29 minutes, San Francisco to Los Angeles, in 35. Sounds awesome. You could commute from, you could commute halfway across the country, and it just hasn't gone that way. And I think in all sorts of different ways across Elon Musk's empire, you're seeing maybe fissures, cracks, ways in which the promises are not necessarily matching up. We saw this ruling with pay in Delaware. Of course, lots of problems documented at X/Twitter. And here you just have a very visceral way where you have these grand promises. And in the end, what you have is basically a glorified shuttle bus system. It doesn't take you, from one end of the country to the other. It takes you from one end of the Las Vegas Convention Center to the other.
Is it just a case of that's all it can do so far?
The plan here, to some extent, yes. The thing that, if you squint, and I think the reason that this was approved, it's partly that it was approved because Las Vegas is a low regulation city. These are mostly on private property. There isn't a ton of oversight from the government, as there might be in other places. But also, they're talking about opening these stations throughout the city. But, when we talk to people on the ground there, it is a long way from happening. It's also hard to see how this is going to make a huge impact on traffic. Again, when you're talking about, moving people 3 at a time very, very slowly, a lot of things would have to happen. Right. And there are lots of reasons for skepticism. Digging underground is hard. There's a reason it costs so much money. It costs so much money because there's stuff you can run into, complicated property rights, and of course,
so the company's not going to create 1 trillion jobs?
Well, which is what Elon Musk told me back in 2017. They were going to create 1 trillion jobs. I'd say it's a long way from that. To put it mildly, there was sort of flirtations or talk of various projects. There was one in Maryland, one in Los Angeles, one in Chicago, and in all these cases, he was bringing along some of the most famous politicians in the United States. So it was Larry Hogan, governor of Maryland, former governor of Maryland, who was, at the time a big star of the Republican Party. Rahm Emanuel, former chief of staff to President Obama, mayor of Chicago, Eric Garcetti, star mayor of Los Angeles. A lot of people went for this, and they just, they haven't been able to deliver. And I think there's probably some element of distraction. Obviously, Musk has a lot going on. And also, I think just tunneling, this is hard. You're dealing with dirt and
putting
muck
people
and
up
stuff.
in space and stuff in space is really hard. Tapping into the auto industry. This is going back to Tim's point, right? How many times we're you count out Elon Musk or whatever, and then he's like, whoa, look what he did. And I understand there's a lot on his plate right now, and that's got to be distracting. But should we not rule him out? Has he not found the right boring tool? What is it, Max?
Well, I would say, I think there's probably a bunch of different factors going on. One thing that was different with SpaceX is you had a very interested buyer, which was NASA. You had the U.S. government wanting to finance this thing, looking for somebody just like Elon Musk, and Elon Musk sort of finding a way to fit himself to sort of make himself look like the thing that the U.S. government want. Elon Musk is really good at this. We're seeing this with Starlink as well, where he's this what would seem like a civilian technology, these internet services for, as Musk told it to Walter Isaacson, I think he said, it's to Netflix and chill. Increasingly, this looks like a potential military tool. This is gonna lead to government contracts and could be a big line of business for SpaceX. I think what happened is in 2016 and 2017, Donald Trump becomes president. There's a lot of talk about infrastructure. And in general, there's been a lot of talk about wanting to spend public money on infrastructure, but there hasn't been a ton of delivery, right? And I think a big part of this was predicated on this, $1 trillion, the thing that Trump was saying, which was like $1 trillion infrastructure plan. And, ultimately, infrastructure, whether it's Elon Musk or anyone else, is very expensive. It's politically dicey because you have land rights and so on, and it just hasn't come together with the speed that SpaceX came together.
Max, I want to dig into something that you said, that you mentioned a little earlier, which is the idea that back in 2017, 2018, a lot of politicians were kind of jumping up and down with the idea of collaborating with Elon Musk. What I noticed in your piece is that tone has totally shifted, and there are now local politicians who are saying, hey, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, including the mayor of Las Vegas, who is, Las Vegas is an interesting place because the city of Las Vegas actually doesn't contain most of the Strip. So it's not like she has oversight over all this. As I said, a lot of it is on public property. But Caroline Goodman, the mayor, longtime mayor, her husband was a longtime mayor. She's like one of probably the most famous politician in Las Vegas, is essentially criticizing it and criticizing it on the grounds that it's unpractical. She, from the start has raised these safety concerns, which I think look prescient when you look at this OSHA thing. And she's essentially saying, this would be great if it could actually happen, but I don't see it. And that, again, that does represent a bit of a departure for Elon Musk. You do feel like in Las Vegas, at least, some of the magic, some of that kind of Elon Musk stardust, it just doesn't feel quite to, shine quite as brightly. Maybe that's the lights of the Strip drowning it out. I don't know. But it definitely feels like there's something different going on there.
All right. Back to the workers, though, and their conditions. Is this something unusual in terms of infrastructure projects? And I'm always a little wary when there's a line in your story, although no one has been killed at a boring company work site so far in Vegas. It does just speak to how tricky it is.
Yeah, as I said, these are not no one's saying they're using chemicals that are worse than anybody else. What the workers are saying, what you see in these OSHA complaints, are sort of like little things that maybe add up to a dangerous situation. And, we have seen similar stories like this around Tesla's car factories, around their, Reuters had a great piece some weeks ago about, a death at a SpaceX site. So, when you're radically trying to cut costs, when you're going around telling people that the only law that matters are the laws of physics, right? I think to some extent there are going to be costs of that, and we're seeing that. But we should say, this is probably more an indictment of Boring Company being less innovative rather than it's like the most dangerous place in America.
There's just hasn't been Proofrock 3 yet, Max. And that, by the way, is the tunnel boring machine.
Read the story, you'll find out more.
Yeah, which is, promising, over-promising and under-delivering.
They have good names, those tunnel boring machines.
Yeah, T.S. Eliot would be proud.
Of course they do. All right, Max, thank you so much. Max Chafkin, he is Bloomberg Business Week columnist, story featured in the new episode of the Elon Inc. podcast, debuting tomorrow on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com/Elon Inc. Coming up next, following this weekend's South Carolina Republican primary race results, billionaire GOP donors pivoting away from Nikki Haley, and I'll tell you where they're going. That's next.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 240 on Wall Street. We're looking at a mixed market. We have got the Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P. They are both lower right now. S&P down 8 to 5,080. That is a drop now of 0.2%. Dow Industrials down 25, a decline there, little changed of less than 0.1%. NASDAQ Composite Index up 21, up now by 0.1%. Stock market losing steam near records as traders brace for a barrage of economic data and remarks from Fed officials this week, Fed speakers that will help shape the outlook for interest rates. 10-year yield 4.30% with a 2-year 4.74%. Spot gold lower by 0.3%, 2,029 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 1.4%, 77.58 for a barrel of WTI. Kathy Wood sold shares of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corp for the first time in more than 2 years, adding to moves to cut exposure in the chipmaker's key customer, NVIDIA. Shares today of the ARC Autonomous Technology Fund, the ETF, they are higher by 1.6%. Taiwan Semi up 1.1%. NVIDIA keeps on going up another 0.8%. Some of the other stories that we're following today involving Boeing. Regulators have issued a scathing report on Boeing's safety culture, putting further pressure on the company as it contends with the fallout from a near catastrophic accident at the start of the year. Again, recapping, S&P lower now by 9, drop there of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, Charlie, with the latest on the markets, now to politics and the political pivot. And when it comes to big donors, Tim, it's safe to say that it doesn't come as a surprise what we're going to tell you about.
Yeah, the news is that the Charles Koch-backed Americans for Prosperity Action will cut off funding for Nikki Haley's presidential campaign. Meantime, other GOP billionaires and big fundraisers are pivoting to where they believe their resources can make a difference. So away from the general election in terms of the president and more to those down-ballot races for the House and the Senate.
All right, let's get to it with Bloomberg News White House and politics reporter Gregory Cordy. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Gregory, great to have you back here with Tim and me. So first up, the money spigot starts to dry up. Not a surprise in terms of what we're hearing about kind of starting to back off or already backing off of Nikki Haley.
Yeah, so as we know, and on Saturday, we had the South Carolina Republican primary, and Nikki Haley actually overperformed there. If you look at where the polling averages had been going into that contest, she won 40% of the vote. Pretty extraordinary given how Trumpy that state is, that you have a sort of what we all consider to be the de facto incumbent Republican, right, in Donald Trump, losing 40% of his own party in a state that he should win easily. And yet, there's just doesn't seem to be much of a path to victory for Nikki Haley now. She did win 3 of the 50 delegates in South Carolina, but that's obviously nowhere near enough to get her back to being competitive. She now goes into Michigan into Super Tuesday without a clear path to victory. And so, as you say, the big donors have decided that it's not that they no longer support Nikki Haley. They still endorse her. They want her to win, but they've decided their money is much better spent elsewhere, and that elsewhere is a number of key Senate races across the country.
Gregory, before we go into that, though, how significant was it that these billionaire investors were backing Nikki Haley versus Donald Trump?
I mean, it's look, Donald Trump doesn't need the backing of billionaires to get his message out, right? He's attention follows him wherever he goes. What Donald Trump needs money for is to pay his legal bills, but that's an entirely different question. Nikki Haley was able to use it.
Can he use money that he raises, or as he seems to get more control over the RNC, which is where it seems to be going, can he use that money?
Yeah, that's something that the RNC is going to have to work out because we are in the middle of a transition now. Just this morning, Ronna McDaniel, the chair of the RNC, announced that she was going to resign. The co-chair will also resign and make way for new Trump loyalists to take control of the party. And what Trump is hoping is that those loyalists that he's installing in the party will be able to use party funds to help pay his legal bills. The RNC says, look, we have a lot of legal issues to work out with there to kind of figure out, which money is eligible to be paid to pay Trump's legal bills, whether it's a good idea. Those are things that have to be worked out, but absolutely Trump is hoping to find new sources of money to help pay those legal bills.
Okay, back to the billionaires in the money spigot here. When it comes to the Charles Koch-backed network of billionaires right now, Gregory, does sitting out the primary rule them sitting out the general election? Like, let's say Nikki Haley does end up dropping out, it does become Trump versus Biden. Is there a chance that these, quote unquote, never Trumpers go back and say, okay, you know what, we are going to back Trump here?
Yeah, this Koch-backed group called Americans for Prosperity Action has always had this sort of love-hate relationship with Donald Trump. Trump himself calls them Americans for No Prosperity. And so, look, is it conceivable that they could go back into the Trump camp? It's possible, but there does seem to be enough bad blood there that a reconciliation seems unlikely. But also, what the Americans for Prosperity says is, look, our number one goal is to prevent Democrats from winning trifecta: the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. That's what they're focused on. They don't want to necessarily, they don't need to win all three, but they want to prevent what they would see as a catastrophe of unified government rule in Washington under Joe Biden. And so that's why they're spending a lot of money on these Senate races, which are also obviously 6-year terms. They see as a better investment for the future, set them up for a post-Trump, post-Biden world in 2028.
It's not just, though, the Charles Koch-backed Americans for Prosperity Action. You guys and the team have a great story out. We're talking about Ken Griffin, right? There's other billionaires who are looking at those down ballot races.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Koch-backed group gets a lot of the attention because of the name, but obviously Ken Griffin's a big name too. And so, yeah, it's emblematic of a bigger shift where, and it was also, I would have to say, it's remarkable that Nikki Haley was able to keep those big donors in her camp for as long as she could, with a diminishing, road to victory there. But yeah, I think both are examples of this donor class really looking for other opportunities to make their voice heard outside of the presidential race.
Gregory, we've documented in my opinion, the troubles that the Trump campaign faces and former President Trump faces in terms of legal challenges. And I'm wondering if that's what Nikki Haley is banking on right now, the idea that she'll be sort of the alternative if, for some reason, the former president is not able to run come November.
They're like just-in-case candidate.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I would note is that while Haley's losing the support of all of these big dollar donors, she is making some of it up in small dollar donors. She's going to do 10 fundraisers in the next couple of weeks here. She is getting money from sort of grassroots people who I think have exactly that kind of idea for her, is that they just can't believe that Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. And for that matter, they can't believe that Joe Biden is in this race, too. There's a lot of people looking for an alternative. The problem with Nikki Haley is that just waiting for Trump to go away. Look, there's elements of the Republican Party that have been waiting for Trump to go away for 9 years now, and it hasn't happened. But also, Trump, by gobbling up all these delegates, he will be able to install loyalists to him at the Republican National Convention, so that even if something happens, whatever that is, it will be a very Trumpy convention to decide who his successor will be. And given the blood that we've seen between Trump and Haley, it's not likely to be Nikki Haley.
Hey, are we putting the cart before the horse because Super Tuesday is coming up, or is that just a date on the calendar? We kind of know how it's going to go.
Yeah, so what's happened now is we're transitioning from these 4 carve-out early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, to a race where a bunch of states, 15 states, are all going to vote on the same day. It's a lot harder to campaign in 15 states than one at a time, so that's one problem that Nikki Haley has. The other problem is that we're transitioning away from proportional delegate rules, where you get delegates even if you don't win the overall race, to rules in most of these states where it's winner take all. All you need to do is get the most votes,
right,
and you get all of the delegates. And that is going to be a very high hill for Nikki Haley to climb, even if she overperforms. If she's been getting 40 to 45% in some of these early states, but she needs 51% to get all the delegates. And so the math just doesn't work out very well for her in Super Tuesday and beyond.
All right. Well, great to check in with you. Bloomberg News, White House, and politics reporter Gregory Cordy joining us from D.C. Coming up next, our One More Thing, a Buffett investor's fortune funding a $1 billion gift. We'll tell you exactly the details. That's coming up next. Tim and I are back in just a moment.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Sources tell Bloomberg Charter Communications is exploring a takeover of a smaller rival, Altice USA. Those sources say Charter is working with financial advisors as it studies the merits of a potential deal for the broadband and video services provider. Charter shares, they are lower now by 1.69%. Altice USA surging now by 45.3%. Members of the Walton family sold roughly $1.5 billion worth of Walmart shares at the end of last week as the stock hovered near a record. According to filings with the SEC, the Walton Family Holdings Trust sold about 8.82 million shares between February 22nd and February 23rd. Walmart up roughly 11% this year, outperforming the 3% advance in the S&P Retail Select Industry Index. Some of the other stories that we're following for you: an activist investor says the Walt Disney Company should appoint a corporate chief technology officer and focus on technology transformation. That, according to Blackwell's Capital, which contends the entertainment and media giant should have an overarching CTO who oversees innovation. Fresh Pet shares are surging today as the natural pet food maker forecasts better than expected net sales and as earnings per share beat Wall Street estimates. Fresh Pet up now by 18.9%. And Moderna shares are trading lower today as HSBC cut its rating on the stock to reduce a sell equivalent from hold, citing uncertainties in the drug maker's revenue. Today, Moderna down by 3.3%. And those are our top company stories at this hour.
Listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, let's get to our one more thing in this hour. And this has a little bit of a Warren Buffett angle, actually a really big angle in terms of Warren Buffett and the wealth that those who invested with the legendary investor many years ago and their own wealth creation.
Yeah, we're talking about a woman named Ruth Gottesman. She's made a largest ever gift to a U.S. medical school. This is according to a statement from Albert Einstein College. She's the widow of a top Warren Buffett investor, and she's
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
This is $1 billion, so really amping it up. But, you know, in a world where we've talked about a shortage of healthcare professionals, people who maybe don't want to be doctors anymore, there's a lot of debt, like this could go a long way.
And then, of course, there is the Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway angle.
Which is great.
Yeah, the proceeds of this coming from an early investment in Berkshire Hathaway. Somebody, as you mentioned, Carol, who knew Warren Buffett for, 6 decades before he passed away in recent years.
We used to do the stories about Coke millionaires, right?
Yeah.
That because he's been a longtime investor, Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett in Coca-Cola, and just all of those who also kind of tapped into that.
I wonder if we're going to see more of this, especially as college tuition becomes. Oh, the other thing, she's not renaming the school. Oftentimes when a donor does something like this, the school gets renamed. She wants to keep it Albert Einstein.
Which is pretty cool. Yeah, it's been there for a long, long time, as we said, in Upper Manhattan. All right, folks, we're getting ready to wrap up this hour of Bloomberg Business Week. For those of you watching on TV, of course, coming up next is the close. For those of you staying with us, Bloomberg Business Week continues on radio, YouTube, and originals. And we're going to get into, the markets are a little mellow today. We've got a lot of eco. We talked about that earlier on tap this week. But we're going to get into Meta and Mark Zuckerberg. He's got a packed week. He's jetting all over Asia, including he's going to make some swords.
Yeah, he's making some swords,
apparently.
doing some skiing, but also meeting with some heads of state. You know, you got to balance work and play, Carol. You know,
Business pleasure.
Also, there's a massive spike in cyber attacks, and the cyber criminals are getting smarter. We're going to talk to the head of X-Force at IBM about how people can stay safe online.
It's not just cybersecurity, it's identity theft.
That's the
this
scary
is the
thing.
You, me, everyone. Apparently there's a major surge, so we're going to tap into that one. Fred Krupp is going to be with us, president of the Environmental Defense Fund, see how we're doing when it comes to sustainability issues. And then we've got two women who have
I'm from the UK and I'm the inventor of the gel razor. And today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the gel razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype or manufacturing possibilities with investment or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I developed the all-in-one. The idea is you pressurise the handle, the gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blades, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September. With copyright protection, I have a logo for the gel razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
Brands. Now they're out with a book on how they did it. Grace Puma, former Chief Operating Officer over at PepsiCo, and Christiana Smith-Shee, former President of the Consumer Direct Division at Nike, will be with us. We're going to talk about their book, but I'm also curious about the consumer spaces that they've played in, what they are seeing that they find interesting.
All that and more over the next 2 hours. First up, though, checking the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We've got the Dow, the S&P, they are lower. NASDAQ pushing higher. 59 minutes to go until the closing bell clangs on Wall Street, with the S&P right now trading lower by 11 points, a drop of just about 0.2%. Dow Industrials down less than 0.1%, lower right now by 22 points. NASDAQ up 7. For NASDAQ, that is a gain of less than 0.1%. 10-year, 4.29%. The 2-year, 4.73%. Spot gold right now down 0.3%, 2,030 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.5%, 77.71 a barrel on WTI. Stock market is losing steam near records. Traders are looking ahead to a number of economic reports, along with remarks from Fed speakers that will help shape the outlook for interest rates. What about the inflation backdrop, though? Priya Misra is portfolio manager at JP Morgan Investment Management.
It's a question of, when, not if. The Fed is still talking about rate cuts. All that is a very positive risk environment. But I would say you have to be careful, think about the tail risks, owning some treasuries at some point, especially given how much those cuts have been pared back, is a nice way to hedge. What if things do worsen a little bit? Having some inflation protection. What if inflation doesn't head as quickly to 2%?
Fresh pet shares surging as the natural pet food maker is out with better than expected, actually forecasting better than expected net sales. And it says earnings per share beat Wall Street estimates. Today, Freshpet up 18.4%. World and national news. Every day, Donald Trump delays paying New York State's $454 million civil verdict against him over his fraudulent asset valuations. The whopping fine is increasing by almost $112,000 in interest. The amount calculated by Attorney General Letitia James will continue to be added, even as the former president challenges the February 16th verdict, a process he began this morning by filing a notice of appeal in state court in Manhattan. Again, recapping, stocks are trading mixed. The Dow, the S&P, they're both lower. NASDAQ higher. S&P right now down 11, a drop of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Charlie, breaking it down. We've already queued you guys up. There's a lot of economic news. There's Fed speakers, although Mike said Really, it's next week when we hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell up on Capitol Hill. So,
That's the main event, Carol.
So it's kind of like, let's just wrap it up, go home. Maybe that's what we can
Oh,
do.
yeah, totally. That's totally
do
what
that.
we're going to do. We can't do that. Unfortunately, we got somebody who keeps an eye on every part of the market.
'Cause there's
That, of
always
course,
something going on.
There is always something going on. Bloomberg News Markets reporter Abigail Doolittle. She's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. So, Abigail, on a day when we're seeing the indices making relatively small moves here, what jumps out at you? What are you watching?
Probably yields climbing right now. We have it's basically the entire curve up about 4 to 5 basis points, and of course we have that important PCE number later this week. So is it going to confirm the? I don't want to call CPI and PPI hot because at least relative to CPI, it was just 0.2% above, but it did go back above, I think, 3% as opposed to going sub 3%. And psychologically, folks were just so set for the idea that inflation is gone and, it's back. I mean, that was basically the idea. So will PCE confirm that? Because, of course, it is the Fed's preferred way of looking at inflation. If it comes in line, it probably, in my view, will be market neutral. If it comes in anywhere below, maybe we're going to see a massive rally sparked, and the opposite, the inverse. If it comes in just a little bit above, I think that it could. I think that the rally potential might be greater, though, actually, than the sell-off potential, because the idea that it could come in, I think it would have to actually come in significantly higher than expected, only from the standpoint that folks may be now expecting that because of those other prints.
Right, but if it was below, it'd be like, well, wait a minute. Like,
Yes,
kind of challenge
exactly.
The narrative
Exactly.
Of, wait
Maybe
a minute,
yes,
inflation is-
CPI, PPI were wrong. So yeah.
What's interesting, I want to go to the mega cap tech, which I've just, we talked about it so much last week, and NVIDIA in particular. Is there anything, is it just kind of a breather? What are you seeing on that front?
Well, I was just looking at Google, and I was looking at Google earlier on this AI. This one analyst is saying that they're not positioned well for AI. And these reports seem to come out on this company every couple of weeks recently. I think just last week or the week before, there was a report that because Microsoft may add their ChatGPT to search, that Alphabet, Google is really going to suffer on that front as well. So we do have Google down, we have Apple down. So Apple's down 0.6%, the Apple Watch. Microsoft down about 0.4%. I don't think that it's...
Google's down 4%.
Yeah, Google's down 4%, which is pretty significant. I'm actually surprised. This analyst, Melius analyst, Ben Reitz, I hope I'm saying his last name correctly, he must really be an axe on the stock for the stock to be having this kind of a reaction. I don't know enough about the AI space to know whether or not this is true, but it seems as though analysts and just investors, there almost feels like there's a hype piece of it that Google... Alphabet, their AI is just not as good as the others, and they're not caught up. I don't know if I think it's because of stumbles in the beginning.
Right.
And a lot of stumbles that were kind of shown this weekend on social media. We're actually going to have Kurt Wagner join us in just a minute, so you're like the perfect setup for that, Abigail, to talk a little bit more about that. You did mention Apple, though, and you and I always go back to Apple.
Yes, love Apple.
And you talk about it being a bellwether. So yes, it's Mag 7 stock. Yes, it's mega cap tech. What is the sort of charting weakness that you're seeing right now when it comes to Apple?
It's below the 200-day moving average. It's been below it for quite some time now. Which is a fancy way of saying that the long-term buyers they're not sure that they want to be in Apple, and the long-term buyer that we really know about is Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah,
they started selling in the fourth quarter. This weakness this year really has the marks of a big investor getting out slowly but surely, so as to not disrupt the price too much, and therefore their profit. Now, they started buying a long time ago, so they wouldn't be disrupting too much of it. But it's caught up in essentially a topping pattern that really does have the mark of a smart investor, a good trader, figuring out how to get out, taking their profit. Now, if Apple, and this is super technical, but it is important to watch, if it goes below its last low of 179 thereabouts, we could really see Apple return back to last fall's lows. There's no support there.
Because it does feel like a little bit of a lower low move.
We haven't. No, I think it would be. I think it would be more of a little bit of a reset.
Oh,
a little bit of a reset.
Okay.
It's hard. There's so much going. It could actually be a significant reset. It could actually potentially pave the path for a reset to go back toward the 2022 lows.
Really?
We're a long way from there. So let's just put that in the back of our minds. What I'm trying to say is this stock is weak. People are, instead of it being bought on strength and seeing the higher highs, right now it's very clear that there's some careful, smart selling pressure on the shares. And the bigger question there, I mean, big to anybody who owns Apple, is where will the stock potentially go? But why? Is it the iPhone slowdown? Is it China?
Yeah.
Is it all of it? You know, people aren't buying the latest, greatest iPhone. You know, like I bought the 14 and I spent a fair amount of money on it. And I'm not even a fancy phone person. I just did this because my last phone was so bad. I wanted to treat myself.
That's what pushes me to update to a new phone too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not going to be happening for me anytime soon. It sounds like that might be the case for other people.
Yeah,
sort
the
of
upgrade
holding
cycle's
off.
gotten so much longer.
Yeah, that you don't need it every year. So if that's the case, and it is the second largest market cap, it could be a tell on the markets overall. It's hard to believe that Apple will go down significantly without the markets.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of certainly the significance of it and what it does. Good stuff. Thank you. Feels like that kind of a day. Bloomberg News markets reporter Abigail Doolittle getting us set up here. And I feel like also the thinking for kind of the week throughout here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. So we just talked a lot about some of the mega cap tech names.
Yeah, taking a bit of a breather after NVIDIA's blowout earnings last week. One exception, of course, that we just talked about is Alphabet, the parent company of Google, which is more like taking a walloping today, down 4%, amid concerns about its position in generative AI and the risks to its search business from AI-powered competition. We got Bloomberg News technology reporter Kurt Wagner, who's all over this story. He joins us from Denver. So, Kurt, I have this rule where I don't go on Twitter/X on the weekends, and I break it every weekend, and I go on.
I was going to say.
I know, I'm so bad. It's terrible. At one point, my wife was like, hello, where are you? And the truth is, I was looking at all the bad generative AI that people were posting, and I think it seems to actually have affected the company's stock. So what I saw over the weekend was people saying, hey, this stuff is not ready for prime time yet, and they were posting examples as to why this was not giving good answers. And now we see the stock down as a result of that?
I think so, and you have to remember that generative AI in particular is such an exciting thing when it comes to the search business, right? So right now, when you think about search online, it's mostly keyword based. You know, you're putting in certain keywords, and if certain keywords aren't attached to images or text or whatever, it's not going to surface. But I think the idea is that generative AI could change all that, right? You could simply put in some keywords, and even if a photo hasn't been tagged with those words, you know, Google ideally would be able to surface it, right? Because that's what you were describing. And so I think there's just this feeling that, like, if Google can't figure out generative AI, they're kind of opening themselves up to, search competition or vulnerabilities there. And so I think that's probably where you're seeing some of this knock. Now, I think it's a bit of a long game. I think it maybe feels a little overdramatic in my opinion if people are selling Google because of this, but I think that's probably where the issue's coming from.
Well, and is it a case of, I mean, listen, this is Google. I mean, Alphabet. I mean, this is it, right? Search. So if for some reason Microsoft through Bing is able to all of a sudden move in on its territory, that would be pretty significant.
I mean, it'd be huge, right? I mean, how often do you say that you go to Bing something? You don't, right? This
ever.
Google has dominated this. Alphabet and Google have dominated this industry for so many years. And so I think, again, if you are nervous, I think that's the reason, is that you see the potential generative AI has for the search business in general, and you want Alphabet to be in the lead in that if you are an Alphabet shareholder.
All right, we're going to shelve this for a while because it feels like we're going to continue talking about it, and the AI stuff, it's just going to continue.
You know what I didn't say when I introduced Kurt?
What?
I didn't say that he's the author of the brand new book, Battle for the
Shame
Bird.
on you.
Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, and the $44 billion fight for Twitter's soul. I'm really sorry about that, Kurt. The book's out last week. Okay. Go pick it up. Okay. Now that we got that out of the way.
Everybody should check it out because some great tales and stories and insight, to be quite honest.
Can we talk about swords?
Well, yeah. Well, speaking of insight, sounds like you have some insight on what Mr. Zuckerberg's going to be up to on his tour across Asia, including some sword making. But let's set the backdrop. What's going on here? What is this trip about?
Yeah, well, thank you for that book plug. You guys are the best. Mark Zuckerberg.
We're just asking for about $1 royalty each on each book sold, but that's it. That's it.
I knew there was a request coming.
It's a Shark Tank, our version. All right, go ahead.
Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg is in Asia this week. He's in Japan right now. He's going to be heading to South Korea middle of the week for some meetings with partners. They're being a little bit cagey about exactly who they're meeting with, but we've heard that it's Samsung and LG. He's even going to meet with the president of South Korea while he's there. I don't really know if we're going to get much news out of this. Like, I'm not sure if the intention is to go there and make some big proclamation or partnership announcement that we're already unaware of. But obviously, the fact that he's there is newsy. And given what Meta is trying to do around AI and all of that stuff as well, I think people are just watching these relationships really closely right now.
Can you talk about what Meta is trying to do around AI? Because there was a figure in your story that as soon as I read it, I yelled over Mark, who I sit next to, over to Carol's desk, and I was like, Carol, did you know that by the end of the year, Meta Platforms is going to have 350,000 of these H100 chips from NVIDIA? Kurt, these are the $30,000 chips.
We pulled out the calculator function and did some math. We're talking about what, $20 billion worth of
$13 billion
chip buying or something like that.
Over $10 billion. Let's say
It's a
over
lot.
$10 billion.
I'll let you two do the math, but yes, I mean, this is a huge priority for Meta. We obviously know about their plans with the metaverse, and people don't necessarily think about that. I think in the same way they think of like the generative AI stuff that we were just talking about with Gemini and Alphabet. But really, I mean, that is what's powering the metaverse, right? That is what's powering a lot of the stuff that Meta does around recommending content in the feed, recommending ads to people. People also kind of don't think about the fact that the advertising industry is being powered by AI, especially at Meta. And the more accurate they can be with their advertising, the more they can charge for that, right? So there's just a whole bunch of different products that Meta is trying to get into that are AI kind of powered, and so you're seeing this commitment from them in their investment, as you pointed out.
I just like, it's interesting because Meta stock has done so well, and a big part of it has been the company, the so-called year of efficiency, but I don't necessarily understand how we take an LLM like Meta Platforms is working on and has, and that becomes integral to the business model.
Well, I think you have to think about it as an assistant type of thing, right? They're still trying to figure out exactly where this is going to, possibly add a new revenue stream. I mentioned that it could improve their existing advertising business, which I think is a real thing. But think about, the virtual assistant idea that companies have been talking about for years. Now, you already may use WhatsApp, you may use Messenger, you may use Instagram. Imagine if you have some sort of assistant across all of those different touch points that is sort of, helping you with things, right? They've talked about putting this in their headsets that they're working on and the glasses that they're working on. So you could see a future, or at least Meta can see a future, where you're interacting with their products in a bunch of different ways, and each of them may have this interchangeable, overarching, AI assistant that you can use to sort of navigate all of these different products. And so I think that's their vision if everything comes to fruition for them.
All right, gotta be quick, 25 seconds. He's going to go to a wedding too, a big deal wedding. Folks, just go online and read about it. But sword making, what do we need to know really quickly?
I saw the video. I couldn't tell you anything about it, but he had some great form. He was, chopping some stuff with these the swords. I mean, clearly his MMA exercises have worked out, right? I mean, he's really handling that hammer pretty good. So
you can see it there if you're watching us on YouTube. I will say, Mark Zuckerberg, between all the time spent in Hawaii, the MMA stuff, the stock price, he seems to be living his best life.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not worried about it.
I am speechless. Kurt Wagner, I'm glad you're never speechless because you always just give us some great stuff. Kurt Wagner, technology reporter at Bloomberg News, joining us from Denver.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, they're both lower. NASDAQ continues to hold on to a gain, barely up 4 points right now. Little changed, up by less than 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 22, a decline there. Also